Story 1. The sounding. The sphere was cold before we ever left the surface, and that was the first thing I got wrong about the whole day. I told myself it was just the aluminum, the way metal holds the chill of a morning even after the sun's been up an hour. I told myself a lot of things that day. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the deep, not what we found down there in the dark past the layer where the light quits. The part I come back to is how many times I lied to myself before any of it started, and how easy it was, and how a man can talk himself right down to the bottom of the ocean one small, reasonable lie at a time. My name's Dale Merrick. I piloted deep submergence vehicles for 11 years, 6 of them Navy and 5 of them contract, and if you'd asked me before that morning whether I was afraid of the water, I'd have laughed at you. I'd have told you fear was for people who didn't understand pressure, and I understood pressure the way a carpenter understands a hammer. It was my whole life. 200 atmospheres, 300, the crush depth math I could do in my head faster than I could figure a tip at a restaurant. I knew the ocean. That's what I told the contract people when they hired me, and it was true, and it didn't help me one bit. We were working off the survey ship Calliope, a 240-foot converted supply boat with rust weeping down her hull like she was crying about something. Sitting over a stretch of the North Pacific about 110 miles south of the Aleutian chain, the water under us went down better than 22,000 feet in places. That's more than 4 miles straight down, and if you've never had a number like that sit under the soles of your boots, let me tell you it does something to a man, even a man who thinks he knows the water. 4 miles of black, the Empire State Building stacked end to end more than 15 times and still not touching bottom. We were surveying a trench system for a mineral outfit, mapping the floor, sampling the sediment, taking pictures of nodules the mining people wanted to scoop up someday with machines the size of houses. Boring work, mostly. Good money. I hadn't seen my daughter in 4 months, and the checks I mailed her mother were the only thing keeping me on any side of decent, so I took the boring work, and I was grateful for it. The sub was called Deep Star 6, which was somebody's idea of a joke I never got, and she was a good boat. 3-person titanium personnel sphere, 7 feet across on the inside, which sounds bigger than it lives. You don't stand up in her. You lie down, mostly, or you crouch, and the pilot sits forward at the viewport with his knees up near his chest for 8, 10, 12 hours at a stretch. And by the end of a dive, your body's folded into shapes it doesn't want to remember. There were 3 of us going down that day, me on the sticks. A sediment geologist named Priya Chandra, who'd been aboard 6 weeks and could talk about mud for longer than any human being I ever met and somehow make it interesting. And a kid named Tom Vasquez, 24, an engineering tech who was making his first real dive to depth and couldn't stop grinning about it. And I remember thinking, watching him load his gear that morning, that I used to grin like that too, before I learned what the deep was actually made of. I want to tell you about Tom for a second, because it matters later. He had a picture of his girl taped up inside his locker on the Calliope, a girl named Renee with a gap in her front teeth and a Padres cap on backward. And every morning before a dive, he'd tap the picture twice with 2 fingers, tap, tap, like a man knocking on a door, and then he'd close the locker. He did it that morning. I saw him do it. Tap, tap. He caught me watching, and he got a little sheepish about it, the way young guys do when you catch them being tender, and he said, "Superstition, man. My dad did it before every shift at the plant. 26 years. Never got hurt." And I said something like, "Good enough reason as any," and I meant it, and that was the last ordinary thing that passed between us before the water closed over the sphere. Priya was quieter that morning than usual. I noticed it and didn't think much of it. She was reading over the dive plan on a clipboard, chewing the cap of her pen, and when I asked her if the coffee'd been strong enough, she said, "There's a cold spot on the chart." I asked her what she meant. She tapped a place on the bathymetric map, a spot down in the trench where the seafloor did something the seafloor isn't supposed to do. The multi-beam's been coming back weird over this one section for 3 days, she said. Like there's a hole the sound won't come back out of. I flagged it to the chief scientist and he says it's an equipment thing, a bad transducer. But I've run the same equipment over the same ground and it comes back clean everywhere except right here. She tapped it again. Right here, it just goes quiet. I looked at the spot. It didn't look like anything. A patch of trench floor about 600 yards across, down at the bottom of the deepest part of the system, better than 21,000 feet. On the chart, it was just a blank where the color should have been, a gray absence in all the blues and greens. Bad transducer, I said. Probably, she said, and went back to chewing her pen. That was the whole conversation. That's how these things start, not with a scream, with a woman chewing a pen cap and saying, probably, and a man agreeing with her because agreeing was easier, and neither of them knowing they'd just said out loud the exact thing that was going to come up out of the dark and take everything. We launched at 8:40 in the morning under a sky the color of an old nickel. The sea state was building. The forecast had a low-pressure system tracking up from the southwest, and the deck boss, a heavy, quiet man named Okafor, didn't like the look of it. I heard him tell the captain the window was tighter than he wanted, but the mining contract had milestones, and the milestones had money attached, and the money ran downhill to all of us. So the decision came down from the bridge to launch on schedule and recover by 6 that evening, ahead of the weather. Standard dive, descend, survey the flagged grid, take the samples, come home. The launch itself is a violent thing that never feels violent from inside. The A-frame crane lifts you off the deck, swings you out over the rail, and drops you into the swell, and there's a few seconds where the sphere rolls and bucks and the surface chopped like a cork in a washing machine. And then the swimmers unhook the lift line and you flood the ballast tanks and the whole world goes green and then blue and then a deeper blue and the bucking stops and it gets quiet. That's the part people don't expect, how quiet it gets. On the surface, the ocean is all noise, wind and slap and the diesel growl of the ship, and then you sink 20 feet and somebody turns all of it off at once. Just the hum of the scrubber fan and your own breathing, and the tick of the hull adjusting to the pressure. We passed 100 feet, 200. The blue went out of the water the way color goes out of a bruise as it heals, from the edges in, until by 600 feet there wasn't any blue left, just a gray-green dusk. And then by 900 that was gone too, and there was only the dark and our lights punching a cone into it. Tom had gone quiet behind me. I checked him in the little mirror I keep clipped by the viewport every pilot rigs one so he can see his passengers without turning his neck in that cramped a space, and the kid's face had lost its grin. Not scared, just solemn. The dark does that. The first time a man watches the last of the light give up and the water turn to ink around a little steel ball with his body inside it, something in him goes quiet and stays quiet a while. I've seen it 100 times. It's the deep introducing itself. "You doing all right back there?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said. "Then, it's a lot of nothing." "It's a lot of nothing," I agreed. Priya had her face down in her instruments. She was logging the descent, water temperature, salinity, the particulate density and the beam of the light, all the numbers that told the story of what layer of ocean we were falling through. Around 1,800 feet, we passed through the deep scattering layer, which is where the sound bounces off billions of little animals that come up at night and sink down at day. And for a few minutes, the water outside the viewport was alive with them, a blizzard of tiny drifting things sliding up past the glass, little jellies and copepods and lanternfish with their rows of blue-green lights. And Tom made a sound like a boy at a fireworks show, and even I smiled, because that part's beautiful, that part I never got tired of. And then we sank through it, and it was gone and there was nothing again. Just the marine snow drifting down, the endless soft fall of dead things sinking from the world of light above us to feed the world of dark below, and we were falling right along with it. 3,000 feet, 4, the hull ticked and popped. Every so often there'd be a groan from somewhere in the frame, a long, low complaint of metal under load, and Tom flinched the first couple times until I told him that was just the boat getting comfortable, that a sub that didn't make noise was a sub you had to worry about, that the popping was the pressure hull compressing a hair and settling exactly what it was supposed to do. He believed me because I sounded like I believed me. I did believe me. There wasn't anything wrong with the sub. I want to be clear about that, because I've had 11 years to go over every rivet of that dive in my head, and there was never one thing wrong with Deep Star 6. Whatever went wrong that day, it didn't come from the boat. I should tell you about my brother, because he was down there in that sphere with me the whole way the dead ride along with all of us, and because you can't understand why I did what I did without him. Danny was 2 years younger than me, and he drowned in the Kanawha River the summer I was 14, in West Virginia, in a slow brown stretch of water below the old B&O Railroad Bridge, where every kid in 3 counties swam because there was nothing else to do, and the town pool cost $1 we didn't have. It was the kind of drowning that doesn't make sense from the outside, the kind that makes people say, but he was a strong swimmer, and he was. Danny could swim rings around me. That's the thing nobody could get past afterward. He went under a log jam that had built up against the bridge piling, and he didn't come back up, and I was the one who went in after him. I went down into that brown water 3, 4, 5 times, feeling along the slick undersides of those logs with my eyes shut because open or shut it was all the same dark, and on the 5th time my hand closed on his ankle and he was wedged. The current had him wedged up under there, and I pulled and pulled and I could not move him, my little brother. I could not move him 1 inch, and my own air ran out and I had to choose, and I chose. I let go of his ankle and I came up because I wanted to live. And that's the truth I've carried in the bottom of me for 40 years. That when the water had my brother and it was him or me, I let go and I came up and I lived and he didn't. So, when people ask me, the Navy shrink asked me, back when they still thought talking would fix me, why a man who watched his brother drown would spend his whole life going down into deep water, I always give them the easy answer, which is that facing a fear is how you master it. And there's some truth in that. Enough truth to end the conversation. But the real answer is uglier, and I've only ever said it to myself. I went down into the deep for 40 years looking for the moment again, the moment where the water has somebody and it's him or you. I went down looking for a chance to make a different choice, to be, one time, the man who doesn't let go, who doesn't come up, who stays down in the dark with the one the water wants. I never told anybody that. I'm telling it now because of Tom, because of what Tom did, because Tom made the choice I'd spent 40 years going down into the ocean hoping to be brave enough to make, and he made it like it was nothing. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Tap, tap, somebody has to, and he was 24 years old, and he taught me in about 4 seconds what I'd failed for 40 years to learn. But I'm getting ahead. That came at 6,000 feet on the way up. On the way down, at 6,000 feet, all I knew was that the water was warm where it had no business being warm. Around 6,000 feet, Priya said, "That's odd." I'd been half dozing the way you learn to on a long descent, one part of my mind on the depth gauge and the rest of it drifting. "What's odd?" I said. "Temperature just went up, 0.4 of a degree. Vent field?" There were hydrothermal vents in that trench system, cracks in the floor where the earth bled hot mineral water into the cold, and they threw off temperature anomalies you could pick up from a distance. But we were nowhere near the vent field on the chart, and we were still a good 15,000 feet above the bottom. "No," she said slowly, "we're way off the vents, and it's not a plume, there's no particulate spike. The whole water column just came up warm right here." She was quiet a second. "It's already going back down. 0.2, 0.1, there, back to baseline." She wrote it down. "That shouldn't happen. Water that deep doesn't just warm up in a patch and cool off again. There's nothing to warm it. Log it and we'll flag it topside," I said. "Yeah," she said, and I heard the pen cap click against her teeth. I checked the mirror again. Tom was looking at Priya, and Priya was looking at her instruments, and neither of them was looking at me. And outside the viewport, the marine snow drifted down through the light, and I had the first feeling then. I want to be honest about the timeline because it's the only thing I've got left to be honest about. The first feeling didn't come at the bottom. It came at 6,000 feet, in a warm patch of water that shouldn't have been warm, when I looked in a mirror and saw two people I was responsible for both looking away from me, and something in the back of my neck went cold and tight, the animal part of a man that knows before the thinking part knows. I didn't have a name for it. I told myself it was the cramped space, the long descent, the coffee wearing off. One small, reasonable lie at a time. We reached the bottom at 11:12 in the morning by the clock on my panel, 21,300 feet, 4 miles of ocean stacked over our heads, and under the skids of the sub, the floor of the trench. I want to try to tell you what the bottom of a deep trench looks like, because most people never see it, and the pictures don't carry it. It's a desert. That's the thing that gets you. You spend your whole life thinking of the ocean as full, teeming, alive, and then you get to the real bottom, the deep bottom, and it's the emptiest place a human being can go. Flat gray sediment stretching out past the reach of your lights in every direction, soft as talcum, undisturbed for 10,000 years. No plants, because there's no light for plants. Almost nothing moving. Every once in a while a sea cucumber, the color of a drowned man's skin, humping along the mud eating the same dead thing snow that fell past our viewport all the way down. A blind white fish with no eyes because eyes are useless where there's never been light. A field of little rocks, the manganese nodules the mining people wanted, each one grown over millions of years around a single grain of sand or a shark's tooth, sitting on the mud like a garden of black potatoes. And over all of it the silence and the cold and the weight. We started the survey grid. I flew the sub in long, slow lanes about 6 feet off the bottom, back and forth, mowing the lawn we called it, while the cameras rolled and the sonar mapped and Priya called out the sample she wanted. It was steady work and it settled all three of us. Tom got his grin back, running the sample arm, scooping nodules into the collection basket, chattering about the machine, and Priya narrated the geology in that easy expert way she had. And for about 2 hours the wrongness of the warm water at 6,000 feet just faded out of my head, the way a bad dream fades once you're up and the coffee's on. We were 3 people doing a job at the bottom of the sea, and the job was going fine. Tom talked the whole 2 hours, the good kind of talking, the kind that fills a small space with something warm. He told us about Renee, how they'd met at a wedding where he was the worst groomsman and she was the maid of honor who had to keep him upright, how he was going to marry her when this contract paid out, how the ring was already bought, was in a sock in his duffel bag right now, 4,000 feet, no, 4 miles. He kept correcting himself, 4 miles up there on the boat. He told us about his old man, the plant, the 26 years, the tap-tap. He asked Priya 100 questions about the mud and she answered every one, patient as a school teacher, and I listened to the 2 of them and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was that I was glad to be exactly where I was, glad to be at the bottom of the sea with these 2 good people doing a hard, clean job. It's a strange thing to remember, that I was happy in the 20 minutes before it started, but I was. I want that on the record too, that Tom Vasquez's last morning had a lot of happiness in it, that he spent it talking about the girl he was going to marry, that he was glad, that we were all glad, right up until the mud changed. There was one thing, though, in those 2 easy hours, that I filed away and didn't look at too hard, the way you do. About 90 minutes into the grid, I started to notice that we'd stopped seeing the animals. Not many things live that deep, but there are always some, the pale sea cucumbers, the eyeless fish, the little ghost shrimp that come and hang in the light, because light is a thing that has never happened to them and they don't know to be afraid of it. For 2 hours they'd been the small, steady company of the dive, 1 or 2 always drifting through the beam, and then, over the space of maybe 15 minutes, they weren't. Priya noticed it before I put it into words. Where'd everything go? She said, not really a question, and I looked and she was right. The water was empty, no cucumbers on the mud, no shrimp in the light, no white fish nosing the sediment, nothing. And it stayed empty, and it kept being empty the closer we flew to the flagged grid. There was a line, is what I understood later, an edge. A place past which the small living things of the deep did not go, the way deer won't bed down in a certain part of the woods, the way a dog will plant its feet at a doorway and not be dragged through. Everything alive down there had cleared out of the ground around the cold spot and left it to whatever the ground belonged to, and we flew right across that line at 6 feet, an altitude with our lights blazing. 3 warm, bright, stupid things going exactly where everything with any sense had fled from. I filed it away. Wrong absence. The animals gone from a place they should be. I told myself the ground was just poorer there, fewer nodules, less to eat, one small, reasonable lie. By then, I told so many that day that one more went down easy, and we flew on. Then we came to the edge of the flagged grid, the blank spot on the chart, the place where the sound went in and didn't come back. I felt it before I saw anything. The sediment changed. For 2 hours it had been that flat, undisturbed gray, that 10,000-year calm, and then the lawn I was mowing started to show disturbance. That's the only word I've got. Furrows in the mud, long, shallow troughs, roughly parallel, sweeping across the floor in a way that nothing natural down there makes. Priya saw it the same second I did, and she stopped talking, and the quiet from the back of the sub was its own kind of sound. "Are those drag marks?" Tom said. "Like from the mining survey? Did somebody already scoop through here?" "Nobody's scooped anything," Priya said. "This grid's never been sampled. That's why it's flagged." She leaned as far forward as the sphere let her. "Dale, hold the sub. Hold it right here." I brought Deep Star 6 to a hover and held her steady in the black, and the 3 of us looked out the viewport at the furrows in the mud. And I remember the exact moment my brain tried to make them into something it understood and failed, because they weren't drag marks. Drag marks are made by something being pulled across the ground. These were made by something moving across it. There's a difference, and you know it in your gut before you can say it in your mouth. The furrows had a rhythm. A left and a right, and a left and a right. A gate. The way a track in snow has a gate. And they were deep, deep in that soft mud, which meant weight, terrible weight. And they were wide apart. Wider than the sub. And they went off into the dark past our lights in the direction of the cold spot, and every single one of them was fresh. 10,000-year-old sediment. And something had walked across it recently enough that the mud hadn't settled. "Something big came through here," Tom said, and his voice had gone thin and young. "There's nothing that big down here," Priya said, but she said it the way you say a thing you need to be true. "There's nothing that size at this depth. The pressure, nothing that size could. There's nothing," she stopped. She'd run out of the sentence. She'd hit the same wall I'd hit. The wall where your knowledge of the deep, all of it, everything you've spent your life learning, just isn't enough to cover what your eyes are showing you. I should have turned the sub around. I want to say that clearly, for whatever it's worth to anybody who ever reads this, though I don't know who that would be. I should have turned Deep Star 6 around right there at the edge of the disturbed sediment and flown us back up the trench wall and blown the ballast and taken us home. Milestones and money and mining contract be damned. Every year that's passed, I've turned the sub around 1,000 times in my head. In the version in my head, I always come home with both of them, but I didn't turn around. Because turning around meant explaining to the chief scientist why I'd aborted a dive over some marks in the mud, and it meant Tom's first dive to depth, ending in a story about the pilot who got spooked. And it meant, if I'm being as honest as I know how to be, admitting to myself that I was afraid, and I had spent 11 years being the man who wasn't afraid of the water. So I did the thing I'd been doing all day. I told myself a small, reasonable lie. I told myself we'd follow the furrows a little way, just to log them, just to get it on camera for the science people, and then we'd go home, and it would be the most interesting thing anybody aboard the Calliope had seen all year. "We'll follow them a little way," I said. "Get it on the cameras. Then we head up." Nobody argued with me. God help me, I wish one of them had. The furrows led downslope, deeper into the trench, toward the blank spot on the chart. and I followed them at a crawl with the cameras rolling and every instrument logging. Priya had stopped narrating. She was watching the sonar now, the forward-looking sonar that reached out ahead of us into the dark our lights couldn't touch, and I could hear her breathing change every time she leaned in to look at it. Tom had gone completely silent. In the mirror, his face was the color of the sediment. The temperature started to climb again. 0.2, 0.4, 0.6 above baseline, and this time it didn't drop back down. It just kept crawling up, the warm patch that had no reason to be warm. And the deeper we went following those tracks, the warmer the water got. And the water is not supposed to get warm as you go down. It is supposed to get colder. It is always colder. That is one of the oldest and most reliable facts about the sea, and it was breaking right in front of us, and none of us said a word about it because saying it out loud would have made it real. Dale, Priya's voice was very careful. I've got a return on the forward sonar. Big one, bearing dead ahead, range 400 meters. The trench wall? We were flying along the bottom of a canyon. A wall ahead wouldn't have surprised me. No, it's off the bottom. It's suspended. It's a return about 60 feet up off the floor, and it's big. It's real big. And Dale, she stopped. When she started again, her voice had dropped to almost nothing. It's moving. The range is closing. 350 meters. It's coming toward us. Everything in me went still. 11 years of training came up out of my spine and took the sticks out of my hands. The cold, automatic part of a pilot that keeps working when the man's gone quiet with fear. And that part of me did the right thing at last. It stopped the sub. It killed our forward motion and brought Deep Star 6 to a dead hover in the black, 60 feet off the bottom, and it reached for the light controls. Because the one thing every instinct in a man's body screams at a moment like that is to see, to throw light on the thing, to know. And the other part of me, the part that had spent all day telling small, reasonable lies, that part said don't. I've thought about that a lot, about the two instincts. About how the animal that wants to see the predator and the animal that wants to hide from it are the same age, both of them older than words, and how they were both right there in my hands at the same second. One on the light switch and one holding it back. 300 meters, 250. Priya reading the range down in that flat, dead voice like she was reading a countdown to something, and I made a decision. I want you to understand it was a decision and not an accident, because I've had to live with it being a decision. I turned off our lights. All of them. The floods, the spots, the little running lights on the frame. I killed every lumen we were putting into that water and dropped us into a dark so total it had weight. And I did it because some part of me older than my training understood that whatever was coming had never in the history of the world seen a light before, that light did not exist where it lived, that we were a lit thing falling through a place that had never been lit, and that the only thing that might save us was to stop being the only bright object in 4 miles of black. The sub went dark. The only light left was the soft green glow of the instruments on Priya's side and my side, and I killed those two, reached over and cut the panel lights, and then there was nothing. Nothing at all. The three of us in a steel ball at the bottom of the ocean in a dark so complete I couldn't see my own hand an inch from the viewport, and outside, somewhere, closing, a thing the sonar said was bigger than our boat. Range, I whispered. I don't know why I whispered. Sound doesn't carry out of a pressure hull. Nothing outside could have heard us scream. But I whispered anyway, the way you do in the dark, the way every animal does. Priya's face was lit faint green by the one instrument she hadn't let me kill, the sonar display, her eyes huge in it. 200 meters? She breathed. 180, 150. Dale, it knows where we are. It's coming straight at us. 100 meters. 90. Everybody hold still, I said. Nobody move. Nobody make a sound. And we held still, the three of us in the dark, in the cold that was somehow getting warm, and the scrubber fan hummed and my own pulse banged in my ears loud enough that I was sure the whole sea could hear it. And Priya stopped calling the range because it had gotten too close, and we waited. The first thing was the smell, which makes no sense. I know that. We were sealed inside a pressure hull. There's no way a smell gets into a sealed sphere at 21,000 feet. I've told myself that 10,000 times. It doesn't help, because I smelled it anyway. We all did. Tom made a small, sick sound in the back, and I knew he smelled it too, a low, cold, rotten reek, like the inside of a chest freezer that's been unplugged for a month, with meat still in it, like the mud flats at the lowest tide when the whole bay smells of sulfur and dead things, a smell of the bottom, of the place where everything that ever died in the ocean finally comes to rest and turns to slime. It filled the sphere. It came from nowhere, and it filled the sphere, and my eyes watered with it. And then the water outside the viewport, the water that had been the purest black in the universe, began to glow. Not our light. We had no light. This was its own light, coming from out there in the dark, a pale, sick blue-green glow like the belly of the deep scattering layer fish, but wrong, spread out, vast, and it was moving, pulsing, sliding, and as it came closer I understood that I was seeing the thing itself, that it made its own light the way the little fish did, that its whole enormous body was hung with rows and constellations and rivers of that cold blue light, and by the light of its own body I began, against every prayer I was praying, to see it. There's a thing that happens to the mind when it's shown something it has no shelf to put on. I've read about it since. I've read a lot since, about the deep, about the eye, about what the brain does with an image it can't file. The mind reaches for the nearest familiar thing and drapes it over the unfamiliar one like a sheet over furniture, so that you see the shape but not the thing, and afterward you can only describe the sheet. That's what my mind did at the viewport, and I've never been sure whether to be grateful for it or not. It hung its sheets. It said to me, in the small, calm voice that keeps working when everything else has stopped, that part is like a hand, and that part is like a mouth, and that part is like the mantle of a squid the size of a gymnasium, and that part is like nothing. That part is like a hole in the water where a thing should be. And under the sheets, doing the slow, boneless rolling, was the actual thing, and my mind would not lift the sheets, and to this day I thank it and I curse it, because the not quite seeing is what let me keep my mind at all, and it's also what's kept the thing alive in me all these years, unfixed, unfinished, still turning over down there in the dark behind my eyes. I'm not going to describe all of it, partly because I can't, partly because I won't. There are things I saw through that viewport that I have never said out loud to another living person, not to the Navy people who debriefed me, not to the doctors, not to my daughter's mother in the 2 years we tried to make it work after I came back wrong, but I'll tell you what I can stand to tell you. It was long, that's the first thing. Long the way I have no reference for, longer than the sub, longer than the calliope maybe, a body that came out of the dark and kept coming, sliding past the viewport lit in its own cold light. And it did not end. It had a texture like nothing alive should have, pale and soft and folded, wet-looking even underwater, hung all over with those lights and with things that trailed off it. Long, pale filaments that drifted and searched, and where it should have had a shape I could hold in my mind, it had instead a kind of motion, a boneless rolling motion, and the lights along its body pulsed in slow waves that traveled its whole impossible length, and Priya was saying something, saying it over and over very quietly, and I realized she was praying in a language I didn't know, and Tom in the back had gone completely silent in a way that was worse than any sound, and then it stopped. The great, pale lit length of it stopped sliding past, and hung there in the black outside our viewport, and the lights along it stopped their slow waving and went still, and I understood, with a certainty that came up from the animal floor of me, that it had felt us, that we were a warm, hollow thing in the cold, a bubble of air and heat where no air or heat had any right to be, and it had felt us the way you feel someone watching you across a room, and now it had stopped, and now it was considering, turning some part of itself toward us, attending. The light outside began to grow. It was coming closer to the viewport. Some part of that vast body was rising up out of the dark toward the little window of glass and titanium that was the only thing between us and 4 miles of crushing black. And the blue-green light swelled and swelled until it filled the whole viewport, until I could see nothing but the light, and in the center of the light, coming closer, there was... I killed the sound of it. In my memory, I've killed the sound. I know, Tom screamed. I know because my ears rang with it after in that little space. But in the memory, there's no sound, just the light swelling, and the thing in the center of it coming up to the glass to look at what had come down into its dark, and I did the only thing left to do, the thing 11 years of training does when the man is gone entirely. I blew the ballast, all of it, every drop, emergency ascent, the drop weights gone in one motion of my hand, and Deep Star 6 leaped up off the bottom of the sea like a cork held under and let go. You don't understand what an emergency ascent is until you've ridden one. A submersible is trimmed to hang neutral in the water, to sit at depth like a thought sits in your head, weightless, going nowhere. To make her go down, we flood the tanks and hang steel drop weights on her belly. To make her come up in a hurry, we let go of everything at once, dump the water, release the weights, and all that pressure that's been trying to crush us for 3 hours suddenly has nothing left to fight. And the sphere, full of nothing but air and 3 terrified people, wants to rise, and it rises hard. We shot up off the bottom at better than 200 feet a minute, which does not sound fast until you are inside it, until the hull is groaning and shrieking around you as the pressure comes off it in a rush it was never built to take fast, until the whole sphere is tumbling and yawing in the black because I hadn't trimmed her. I'd just thrown everything away and prayed, and we spun up through the dark like a bubble in a bottle turned over. I got the lights back on at some point. I don't remember doing it. My hand must have found the switch out of habit, because the floods came up and threw their cone into the water again, and the water was empty. Just the black and the marine snow, only now the snow was falling up past us, streaming down the viewport the wrong way because we were rising through it so fast. Empty water, nothing there. And for 1 second, 1 single second, I let myself think we'd gotten away. Then Priya said, "It's under us." She had the down-looking sonar. Of course she did. And the return was there, filling it. The whole bottom of the display lit up solid, and it was rising with us, matching us. 200 feet a minute straight up, this thing that had lain on the bottom of a trench for I don't know how many thousand years was coming up after the little warm, bright bubble that had disturbed its dark. And it was faster than us. The range was closing, and I understood the arithmetic of it the way you understand a thing you can't do anything about. We could not outclimb it. A submersible in emergency ascent goes as fast as physics lets it go and no faster, and whatever was below us was not bound by the same physics, or was simply stronger, and it was going to catch us somewhere in the 4 miles of water between the bottom and the boat, and there was not one single thing I could do about it except sit in my little steel ball and rise and wait to be caught. I did the only thing I had left. I got on the acoustic phone, the underwater telephone that let us talk to the Calliope, and I keyed it, and I said, "Calliope, Deep Star, we are in emergency ascent. We have a situation. We need the recovery crew standing by right now. Do you copy?" And my own voice came back to me sounding like a stranger's, high and fast. And the surface controller, a good man named Ellison, came back with, "Deep Star, Calliope, copy emergency ascent. Say the nature of your situation." Over, and I opened my mouth to tell him, and I found that there were no words. What was I going to say? There's something down here. There's a thing. It's the size of the ship, and it's made of light, and it's coming up after us, and it should not exist. I said, "Just be ready. Have the crane ready. We're coming up hot, and we are not going to want to be in the water 1 second longer than we have to." And Ellison, God bless him, didn't ask me to explain. Something in my voice told him what he needed to know. "Copy, Deep Star. We've got you. Weather's come up. Seas are running 12 feet, but we've got you. Come on home." 12-foot seas. I'd forgotten there was a world up there with weather in it. The low-pressure system had arrived early, right on schedule to make everything worse. That's the thing about the deep. I've never been able to make land people feel that while all of this was happening to us, 4 miles down in the dark with a thing rising after us, the world up top was just having a rough afternoon of weather. Ellison was drinking bad coffee. The cook was cursing the swell and the way it threw his pots around. Somebody up there was probably annoyed about the Wi-Fi. The horror of the deep is a completely private horror. It happens in a sealed ball in a place no light has ever reached, and there is no way to carry it up into the daylight and set it down where other people can see it. And that, more than anything, is why I told the inquiry the equipment story, not to protect myself, because the true story cannot be brought up out of the water. It doesn't survive the ascent. It's like those deep fish that burst when you bring them to the surface, that are only whole under the weight they were made for. The truth of that dive only exists at depth. Up here in the air, it just sounds like a man who came back wrong. We rose. 9,000 feet. 8. The temperature outside was doing insane things now. Warm, then cold, then warm, and the smell was back in the sphere, that freezer full of dead meat reek, and Tom in the back had started to talk. Not to us, to himself, or to Renee, I couldn't tell. Low and steady and constant, a stream of it, tap, tap, 26 years and never got hurt, tap, tap, and I wanted to reach back and take the kid's hand, but I couldn't let go of the sticks. I was fighting the sub's tumble the whole way up, trying to keep us from spinning so hard we'd all black out, and all I could do was say his name. Tom, Tom, stay with me, Tom. We're going up, we're going home, you're going to see Renee, stay with me. And he'd go quiet a second and then start up again, low and steady. And behind his voice I could hear Priya on the sonar, calling the range down to the thing below us, the way she'd called it down before, only now the numbers were going the wrong way. Now they were shrinking. At 6,000 feet, the exact depth, I noticed even then, the exact depth where the water had first gone warm on the way down, where the first feeling had come up the back of my neck, 6,000 feet. Like the number meant something, like it was a door we'd opened on the way down and now had to pass back through at 6,000 feet. It caught us. It didn't ram us. I'd braced for a ram, some part of me expecting a blow that would crack the sphere and end everything in a half-second of cold and dark, and it never came. And in a way, what did come was worse. What came was the light. The blue-green glow bloomed up underneath us and around us, filling the water on every side, until we weren't rising through blackness anymore, but through a whole ocean lit that sick, cold color, and I understood that the thing had wrapped itself around us. That it was so large it could simply envelop us, surround the sub on all sides with its body, and it had, and now we were rising up through the inside of it, through a tunnel in the middle of the living light, and the pale, searching filaments I'd seen at the bottom were all around the viewport now, drifting against the glass, touching it, exploring it. And where they touched, the glass, I watched this happen. I watched it with my own eyes 6 inches from my face. Where the filaments touched, the glass began to frost, to cloud. Some cold or some chemistry coming off them, etching the viewport blind. And I thought, it's going to blind us. It's going to close the one window we have and we'll rise the rest of the way in the dark inside it, not knowing. And then Tom unbuckled. I heard it before I understood it. The click of his harness in the back of the sphere, and Priya shouting his name, and the shift of his weight in that space too small for shifting weight, and I couldn't turn around. I had the sub. If I let go of the sub, we'd tumble and die. So all I had was the little mirror, and in the little mirror I saw the kid's face, and the kid's face was done. That's the only word. Something in Tom Vasquez had reached the end of what it could hold and gone somewhere else, somewhere past the fear, and his eyes were calm, calmer than they'd been all day. And he was looking at the viewport where the filaments were frosting the glass, and he said, clear as anything, the first clear thing he'd said in 10 minutes. He said, "It wants one of us. It's not going to stop until it has one of us." "Tom, sit down," I said. "Tom, buckle back in. We are going to make it. Sit down." "It's okay," he said. "It's okay, Dale. Somebody has to. My dad always said somebody has to." And he reached for the emergency hatch dump, the manual release. The one that's guarded and safetied exactly, so a man in a panic can't do what Tom was about to do, and his hands were steady, steadier than mine. And he worked the guard off it with the calm of a man doing a job he'd trained for his whole life. Tap, tap, and I screamed at him, and Priya screamed at him, and neither of us could reach him. And at 6,000 feet, inside the body of the thing, Tom Vasquez blew the hatch. I have to stop for a minute. Okay. Here is what I understand about pressure, that I understood then and understand now. At 6,000 feet, the water outside is coming in at better than 2,600 pounds on every square inch. A human body is mostly water and does not compress. Air does. When Tom opened that hatch, the ocean did not come pouring in slow like water into a boat. It came in like the hand of God. The pressure equalized in a fraction of a second, and in that fraction of a second the air in the sphere, the air we were breathing, the air keeping us alive, was blown down to a wafer. And everything soft that had been full of that air was, I said I wouldn't describe all of it. I'm going to keep that promise, mostly, for Tom's sake, and for Renee's, and for mine. But I'll tell you that it was fast. I have held on to that for 11 years, the one mercy in it. It was so fast that I don't believe he felt the cold or the crush or anything at all. One instant he was reaching for the release with steady hands, and the next the sphere was full of the sea and the thing outside had what it wanted, and it was fast. It was faster than the thought, faster than the word no that was still coming up my throat when the water took him. And the sub, this is the part the Navy people could not believe, the part they made me draw on a whiteboard, the part that got me my early retirement, and the checks that let me pay for my daughter to grow up without me, the sub did not flood. Because a personnel sphere has a design nobody ever expects to test. The hatch is a plug, a truncated cone seated from the inside, and the water pressure that should have kept it jammed shut is exactly the thing Tom overcame to open it. But the sphere itself, once the pressure equalized, once the air was gone and the water was in a rising sphere full of water, still has the buoyancy of its own hull and its foam and its empty tanks, and mine did, and we kept rising. Priya and I, in a steel ball half full of the sea and the ruin of a good young man, up through the light, and the light, let us go. That's the thing I can't make anybody understand. It let us go. The moment it had Tom, the moment the sea took him out through that hatch and into the cold, the light around us began to fade, to sink, to peel away from the sub and drop back down toward the bottom where it lived, and the awful cold reek pulled back with it. And the last I saw of the thing that came up out of the trench was the blue-green glow of its body sinking away beneath us, slow and enormous and satisfied, back down into the 4 miles of dark, carrying with it whatever it had come up to get, and Priya and I rose the rest of the way to the world of light in a broken sphere, soaked to the chest in water so cold it stopped my legs from working, holding each other's arms, saying nothing, because there was nothing, there has never been anything, to say. They got us on deck in the 12-foot seas at 4 in the afternoon. It took 3 tries to get the crane hooked with the boat rolling like it was, and every second the sphere hung in the water on the surface I was sure it was coming back for the 2 of us that were left, and it didn't. And they swung us up over the rail and set us down and cracked the hatch, and Ellison was the first face I saw, and whatever was on my face put a look on his I'll remember longer than I remember my own daughter's. They found Priya alive and me alive, and a lot of water, and the fact of 1 empty harness, and Tom's helmet, which had come off him and stayed inside, floating, and nothing else of Tom at all. The inquiry took 6 weeks. I told them the truth for the first 3 days and watched their faces, and then I understood what the truth was going to cost me, and I started telling them a different thing. A thing about a catastrophic hatch seal failure at depth, an equipment story, a story with a bad part in it instead of a thing in the dark. Because the equipment story let Tom's death be an accident with a cause and a lesson and a corrective action, and it let Renee have a folded flag and a settlement instead of a nightmare. And it let me keep the last shred of the thing I'd been my whole life, the man who understood the water. Priya told the same story. We never discussed it. We just both walked into those rooms and told the version that let everybody keep living, and the sonar data that would have backed up the true version had a corrupted sector right across the part that mattered. The down-looking log from 6,000 feet, gone, just gone. A bad sector, an equipment thing, probably. Priya flagged it and the chief scientist said it was a transducer fault, and she said probably, and I said probably, and that was that. I came back wrong. That's the phrase my daughter's mother used. Near the end of the 2 years, we tried to put ourselves back together after, and it was fair, it was true, I couldn't argue it. I came back from that trench, and I was a man with a locked room in him, and everything that had been in the marriage before had to fit around the locked room, and there wasn't enough house left over. I'd wake at 3 in the morning, 3:17 most nights, always around then, and I'd go stand in the kitchen in the dark and not turn the light on, because I couldn't, because turning on a light in a dark room had become a thing I understood too well now, what it meant, what it called, and she'd find me standing there and she'd say, Dale, come back to bed. And I couldn't tell her that I was down at the bottom of a trench 4 miles under the Pacific, that I went there most nights, whether I wanted to or not, that the sound going out and not coming back had become the sound of my own life. She took our daughter to her sisters in Ohio, the spring our girl turned 9, and I let them go, the way I let go of Danny's ankle, because I wanted them to live. And living meant living somewhere I wasn't. I send the checks. My daughter's 17 now. She writes me sometimes. She doesn't know any of this. She thinks her old man was a sailor who got quiet, and that's close enough to true, and I'll let her keep it. The one thing the ocean gave me, if you can call it a gift, is that I stopped being afraid of dying. I'd spent my whole life so scared of the water having me that I'd built my entire self around not being scared. And then I sat 6 inches from the thing at the bottom of the world, and I watched a 24-year-old kid open a hatch to feed himself to it so that I could go home, and after that dying just moved. It moved from the front of me to the back of me. It's still there. It's just not in the doorway anymore. What's in the doorway now is the other thing, the thing I can't name, the thing that let us go, and I've come to understand that being unafraid of dying and being afraid of that are not opposites. That a man can hold both at once, that in fact they might be the same thing looked at from 2 sides. I don't dive anymore. I want to tell you it's because of the fear, and the fear is real. I won't pretend it isn't. I can't get in a swimming pool now without the bottom of it pulling at me. But it's not really the fear. It's that I know something now that I didn't know before, and knowing it took the water away from me for good. Here's what I know. We think of the deep as empty because that's what our instruments tell us, and our instruments tell us that because the deep is so vast and so old and so dark that a thing living down there could be the size of a ship, could be older than the pyramids, could lie on the bottom of a trench for 10,000 years between one meal and the next, and never once cross the path of the little lights and cameras and sound pulses that we drop down on strings and call exploration. We haven't mapped the deep. We've dropped a needle into an ocean and pulled it back up and called the whole thing charted. There are cold spots on the chart where the sound goes in and doesn't come back, and every one of them is a door, and behind some of those doors there is something lying in the dark that has all the time in the world, and that only wakes and only rises when something warm and bright and stupid comes down to disturb its rest. Priya sent me a card last Christmas. She's teaching now at a university, geology, undergraduates. She doesn't go to sea anymore either. The card had a picture of snow on it, and inside she'd written just 2 words, no name, because she knew I'd know, because there's only one other person alive who understands. She'd written, still quiet, meaning the cold spot, meaning the door, meaning it hasn't come up again, hasn't been disturbed again, is still down there in the dark being still. and I put the card on my refrigerator and I look at it sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, which is most nights, and I think about Tom Vasquez tapping a photograph twice with 2 fingers, tap, tap. Superstition, man. My dad did it before every shift, 26 years and never got hurt. And I think about how the bravest thing I ever saw a human being do was open a hatch at 6,000 feet with steady hands so that 2 other people could go home, and I make myself a cup of coffee I'm not going to drink. And I sit in my kitchen, and I listen to the quiet, and I wait for it not to be quiet anymore. Still quiet. For now. Story 2. The dead loss. The net came up wrong on the 3rd tow, and I knew it before the winch did, before the sounder did, before anybody said a word. I'd been dragging bottom on the Marie Delacroix for 9 seasons, and you learn the boat the way you learn a woman you've been married to too long. You know by the sound of her what kind of mood she's in. And the winch that morning had a note in it I didn't like, a strain up in the high end of its whine that meant the net was heavy with something that wasn't fish. Fish come up singing. A good bag of pollock comes up light and bright, and the boat leans into it happy. This came up like we'd hooked the bottom of the world and were trying to pull it loose, and Rennick, up in the house, felt it too, because he throttled back and stuck his head out the wheelhouse door and hollered down at us over the wind. What have we got? What's she dragging? And none of us could tell him, because none of us knew, and that not knowing is where I'm going to start, because that's where it started for all of us. With a net that came up heavy and wrong on the 3rd tow of a bad gray morning, 400 miles from anywhere, on the deep edge of the Bering Sea shelf where the bottom falls away into water 2 miles down and the charts stop meaning much. My name's Cal Buford. I was 51 that season, and I had no business still being a deckhand at 51, and everybody on that boat knew it, and nobody said it. Because deck work is a young man's work, and an old man doing it is either the best kind of steady or a sad kind of stubborn, and I was some of both. I was on that boat for the money, same as all of us, but I had a particular kind of money I was chasing, which was my grandson's kind. My daughter's boy, Denny, 7 years old, born with a hole in his heart that the doctors in Anchorage could fix, but the fixing cost more than my daughter would make in 10 years waiting tables. And I'd done the math the way a man does when there's a child on the other end of it, and the math said 3 good seasons on a factory dragger would close the gap, and I was 2.5 seasons in. 2.5 seasons of frozen hands and 4 hours of sleep and my back going out and my knees full of ground glass, and I'd have done 10 more. I'd have done it till my heart quit, because that's what the boy was worth, and I want you to understand that going in. I want you to understand there was a reason I stayed on that boat past the point a smarter man would have left it. His name was Denny, and he had a hole in his heart, and I was going to fix it. We were 6 aboard. Rennick was the skipper, a lean gray Newfoundlander who'd fished every ocean that had fish in it and a couple that didn't anymore. A hard, fair man who I'd have followed into worse than we ended up in. His nephew Sean ran the factory line below, a big soft kid trying to be hard, 20 years old, out to prove something to an uncle who wasn't asking him to prove anything. There was a Filipino engineer named Boado who kept the Marie's tired old diesel alive by talking to it, actual conversations. I heard him down there in the engine room at 3 a.m. murmuring to that motor like it was a sick horse, and it ran, so nobody gave him grief about it. There was a deckhand named Pruitt who was mean in the small way that scared young men are mean, and a deckhand named Whitfield who was Pruitt's opposite, quiet and kind and slow. And the 2 of them had bunked together 3 seasons, and were closer than brothers and fought like them too, and there was me. 6 men on a 130-foot dragger, working the deep edge in October, when everybody with sense had already run for the barn ahead of the weather, because the weather was coming. The weather is always coming out there in October. And we'd stayed out 1 extra week past when we should have, because the fishing had been lousy all season, and Rennick needed a good trip to make payroll, and I needed a good trip for Denny, and every single one of us had our own reason to be exactly where we should not have been. I'd been fishing since I was 17, which meant 34 years of it, which meant I'd forgotten more about the sea than most men ever learn, and none of it saved me. And I want to say that plainly because I've read the things people write about the ocean, the pretty things, the things about respecting her and knowing her moods and coming home safe if you just mind her ways. And it's all comfort and it's all a lie. The men who die out there aren't the ones who don't respect the sea. They're just the ones who were standing in the wrong place when she decided. I respected the sea my whole life. I minded her ways. It didn't matter one bit in the end, because what took my crew wasn't the sea at all. It was something the sea was only holding for us, down in the dark, the way a coat check girl holds a coat. Let me tell you about my daughter, since I've told you about the boy. Her name's Marie, no relation to the boat. The boat was named for the owner's dead wife, but I'd take the omen if I were the kind of man who took omens. My daughter's name on the hull of the boat that near killed me. Marie had her son young and had him alone, the boy's father being one of those men the tide brings in and takes back out, and she waited tables at a place in Wasilla, and she never once asked me for a dime. Not once. She was too proud. She got that from her mother, and not from me. So when Denny was born blue and the doctors said the words hole in the heart and the words $140,000, she didn't call me. I heard about it from her mother, my ex-wife, who called me on the boat's satellite phone, which costs a fortune a minute, and told me my grandson was going to die slow over a few years unless somebody found money nobody had, and I stood in the wheelhouse of a different boat that night, a season before the Marie, and I looked out at the black water and I did the math and I decided, that's all, I decided. A man decides a thing like that in about the length of time it takes to say it, and then he spends years paying for the decision, and I don't regret it. I want to be clear. I have never once regretted deciding to save the boy. What I regret is the week, the one extra week. We should have run for the barn with the rest of the fleet, and we stayed out 1 week because the season had been lean, and that week is the whole difference between 6 men coming home and 2. And I made my peace with the decision to save Denny a long time ago, but I have never made my peace with the week, and I don't expect to. Rennick knew about Denny. That's the kind of skipper he was. On a boat, real things about a man come out over enough cold nights, and Rennick knew why I was out there past the age I should have been, and he never once made me feel the fool for it, and more than that. He'd been quietly cutting me a bigger share than a deckhand rates, a little more each settlement, telling the books it was a bonus for experience. And I knew what he was doing, and he knew I knew, and neither of us ever said a word about it, because that's how it's done between men who respect each other, in the quiet, in the numbers, never out loud. He was carrying me and the boy both, that old Newfoundlander, and he never asked for a thing back, and at the end, when the thing came up through the wheelhouse floor, he put himself between it and me without a half-second's thought, and I have wondered ever since whether he did it for me or for Denny, whether the old man spent the last motion of his life buying my grandson a father figure's worth of a chance, and I'll never know, and I have to live with not knowing, and that's most of what living is, at my age, not knowing and living anyway. The third tow, let me tell you about the third tow. We'd made 2 that morning, both of them thin, a few 1,000 pounds of pollock and a lot of trash fish in the kind of numbers that put a gloom over the whole boat. Because a gloomy boat is a boat that isn't making money, and every man aboard can do that arithmetic. Rennick had been working us east and east, out toward the edge, out past the grounds we usually fished, chasing marks on the sounder that his gut said were fish. And around 10 in the morning he found a mark he liked, a big soft cloud of a return hanging just off the bottom in 400 fathoms, which is deep for us, deeper than we usually drag. Right out on the lip where the shelf breaks, and the water goes to hell below it. "There's our trip, boys," he said over the intercom, and there was gladness in it, real gladness, and we set the gear and paid out the wire and started to drag. And for 40 minutes the Marie towed easy and happy, and the sounder said the bag was filling, and we all started thinking about the trip turning around, about full holds, about home, and then the winch changed its note, and the net came up wrong. It took the main winch and the auxiliary both to bring it, the two of them straining and smoking, and the boom bent in a way I didn't like, and the whole boat listed hard to starboard as the bag came up off the bottom, and Rennick worked the throttle and the rudder to keep her from broaching in the swell. And it took us the better part of an hour to bring up a net that should have taken 15 minutes, and the whole hour I stood at the rail watching the wire come in foot by grinding foot, and I had a feeling in the meat of me that I have never had before or since. A feeling like standing at the top of the cellar stairs as a boy and knowing, just knowing, that you should not go down. The wind was building the whole time. The sky had gone the color of a dead television, and the swells were standing up taller, 8 feet, 10, and the spray came over the rail cold enough to burn. And up out of 2,000 feet of black water the net came, and when the bag finally broke the surface off the stern, wallowing and huge, twice the size any bag of fish had a right to be, the whole crew went quiet at the rail, all of us, even Pruitt, because you could see even through the gray water that whatever was in that net, most of it wasn't fish. There were fish, I'll get to the fish, but the fish were just the part that made sense. We got the bag over the deck, and Rennick opened it, and it came down in a slithering roar the way a bag comes down, tons of it, and the deck filled to our knees, and the first wave of it was pollock and cod and halibut. Ordinary catch, though a lot of it was strange, deep caught, pale and swollen, and burst the way deep fish burst when you haul them up too fast. Their eyes pushed out and their stomachs pushed out through their mouths, ruined by the pressure change, and that alone put a smell on the deck that turned Sean gray. But under the ordinary fish was the other stuff, the deep stuff. Things I'd never seen in 9 seasons, and things I don't think anybody had seen, ever. Because we dragged the very lip of the shelf and pulled up a slice of a world that doesn't come up. There were fish with teeth like glass needles and jaws that unhinged all the way back, black as tar, some of them still working their mouths in the air, slow, like they were chewing the sky. There were things that were mostly transparent, jellies the size of trash can lids, and long ropey things with no eyes and no fins that Whitfield swore were a kind of eel and Bo Otto swore were something else. And everywhere through the pile there were the lights. That was the thing that stopped us all. A lot of the deep things still had their lights going, that cold blue-green glow that deep animals make, and the whole heaving pile of the catch was shot through with points and rivers of that dying light, winking out one by one as the animals died in the air, so that the deck looked like a city scene from an airplane at night, going dark neighborhood by neighborhood. And we stood in it to our knees, and nobody moved to work the pile the way we should have, because there is a kind of strangeness that shuts the working part of a man right off. And then Pruitt, down near the middle of the pile, said, "The hell is that?" in a voice that had gone high, and pointed, and we looked, and there in the center of the catch, half buried in the ruined fish, was the egg. I don't have a better word than egg, though it wasn't like any egg you're thinking of. It was the size of a truck tire, maybe bigger, and it wasn't hard-shelled. It was leathery, translucent, a dark amber color with something moving inside it, something coiled and slow. And it was warm. I know it was warm because the fish piled against it were already going soft and off in the cold air everywhere except right around the egg, where they steamed, where a little haze of warmth came up off the thing into the freezing wind. It sat in the middle of our catch, pulsing with a light of its own, slower than the dying lights of the little fish, a deep, slow throb like a heartbeat, like something's heartbeat. And the coiled thing inside it turned over lazily against the leather wall, and we 6 men stood in a ring around it in the rising storm and the cold blue light, and none of us said anything for what felt like a year. Rennick broke it. Skippers have to. "All right," he said, and his voice was steady, but I'd known him long enough to hear the thing under the steady. "All right, nobody touch that. Cal, get the good fish sorted and below, quick as you can. We're not going to want to be sitting here long. The glass is dropping like a stone. Sean, get on the pumps. Pruitt, Whitfield, get me that thing over the side. I don't care what it is. It's not fish, and it's not going in my hold. Push it back over the side. And Whitfield, quiet, kind, slow Whitfield, said the thing that I think about every day of my life now. He said, "Skipper, I don't think we should put it back." "Why the hell not?" Rennick said, and Whitfield stood there in the light of it, and his face had a look I'd never seen on him, a soft, dreaming look, and he said, "Because it's not going to want us to have done that." And then he blinked, like he was waking up, and he looked confused, like he didn't know where the words had come from, and Pruitt said something ugly and grabbed him by the shoulder, and the moment passed, and we went to work. But I'd heard it. We'd all heard it. And here's the part I have to be honest about, because I've spent a long time being honest about this in the dark of my own head and never out loud until now, when Whitfield said that. When he said it's not going to want us to have done that, some cold, agreeing thing turned over in the bottom of me, the same thing that turns over inside the egg, and for just 1 second I have never forgiven myself for. I did not want to put it over the side either. Something in me wanted to keep it, wanted to take it home, wanted, God help me, to take care of it. And then the second passed and I was just a cold, tired old man on a deck full of dead fish in a building storm, and I picked up my sorting fork and I went to work. And behind me I heard Pruitt and Whitfield start to argue about how to move a leathery egg the size of a truck tire, and I did not turn around, and that was my mistake. The first of the mistakes. Because if I'd turned around, I might have seen the crack that had already started to run down the side of the shell. We never got it over the side. I want to be clear about the order things happened, because the order is the only thing that makes sense of any of it. We did not put the egg back. But not because Whitfield talked us out of it. We didn't put it back because before we could, the storm hit us for real, and everything went to hell all at once the way it does out there, and by the time we came up for air, the egg had cracked, and by then it was too late to talk about the ocean anymore. By then, we were talking about the boat, and about how many of us were still on it. The low came in faster than the forecast, faster than anything Rennick had seen, and that's a man who'd fished 60 years. 1 minute we were working a 10-foot swell, and the next the wind went from 30 knots to 60 in the space of about 4 minutes. A wall of it. A solid moving wall of wind and water that laid the Marie right over on her beam ends and buried the whole starboard deck, all of us in it, in a wave of black water that came clear over the house. I got a hand on the rail. I don't know how. 51 years old with ground glass in my knees, and I got a hand on the rail and held on while the sea tried to take me, and when the boat came back up, she came back up. God bless her. That old dragger came back up out of it like a whale surfacing, shedding water off every rail when she came back up. Sean was screaming, and I looked, and the wave had taken Pruitt. Just like that. No struggle, no cry, no man overboard. Just a place at the rail where Pruitt had been and now was not, and the black water where the sea had folded him under and gone on. Whitfield was screaming his name, trying to climb the rail to go in after him, and Boato and I both got hold of Whitfield and dragged him back down onto the deck, and he fought us hard, because that was his brother out there, and Rennick was on the loud hailer roaring at us to get below, secure the deck, and get below, and there was nothing to be done. You do not turn a 130-foot boat around in 60 knots of wind in a 30-foot sea to look for a man in black water at 11 in the morning under a sky like the inside of a grave. He was gone the second the wave took him. We all knew it. Even Whitfield knew it, under the screaming. Pruitt was the seas now, the first of us the sea took, and I remember thinking, hauling Whitfield down the ladder into the house with the wind trying to peel us off the boat. I remember thinking at least it was quick, at least the sea took him quick, and I was wrong about that too. The sea didn't take Pruitt. I know that now. Something else did, and it wasn't quick, and the sea just got the blame the way the sea always does. We got below, we dogged the hatches. The Marie hove to, turned her bow up into it and rode, engine just ticking over enough to hold her nose to the weather. And Boato went down to nurse the diesel, and the rest of us sat in the house in our wet gear and shook, and Rennick got on the radio and called in Pruitt's loss to the Coast Guard station at Kodiak. 400 miles away, and their voice came back thin and crackling through the storm saying they couldn't launch, not into this, not at this range, that we were on our own until the weather broke, that they were sorry, and Rennick said understood in a voice with nothing in it, and hung the mic back on its hook, and we sat. And out on the deck, in the storm, buried in a slurry of dead deep-sea fish that the waves hadn't quite managed to wash overboard, the egg lay cracked open, and it was empty, and none of us knew it yet. Here is the thing about a boat in a storm that people who've never been in one don't understand. It gets small. The whole world shrinks down to the inside of the hull. This little steel box of light and warmth pitching and rolling in the middle of a black chaos that wants you dead, and there is no outside. There's just the box and the noise, the endless shrieking, booming noise of the sea working on the hull, and after a few hours of it your mind starts to do strange things, and you can't always tell the strange things your mind is doing from the strange things that are actually happening, and that blur, that not being able to tell, is where it lived. Whatever came out of the egg, it lived in the blur. It lived in the noise and the small and the wet and the exhaustion, in the place where a tired, terrified man can't quite trust his own eyes and ears, and it used that place the way a burglar uses a dark house. There were signs before Sean. There are always signs, and men always find the reasons not to read them, and I was as guilty as any. The first sign was the fish. Somewhere in the first hour after the storm hit, while we were still hove to and shaking in the house, Moado came up from the engine room to grab a thermos of coffee, and he stopped at the top of the ladder and he said, "Anybody go down and look at the catch? In the holds?" And Rennick said no. Why? And Boado said, "The bilge alarm keeps going off on the number 2 hold, and when I pump it, it's not seawater coming out, it's warm. The bilge water out of number 2 is coming up warm." And there it was, the same word from that morning, warm, the word that had no business in that cold. And Rennick said the pump's probably running hot, and Boado looked like he wanted to say something else and didn't, and went back below with his coffee, and I let it go. We all let it go, because a warm bilge is a small thing and we had a storm to survive. The second sign was the lights. Not the thing's lights, the boat's. The Marie's lights had been browning out with the generator surging in the weather, which is normal, but sometime in that first afternoon they started doing something that wasn't normal. They started dimming in a rhythm, a slow pulse, bright and dim and bright and dim, and it didn't match the surge of the engine, it matched something else. It matched, I realize now, the slow throb the egg had pulsed with on the deck, the deep, slow heartbeat of it, and the boat's whole electrical system had somehow caught that rhythm like a man catches a yawn. And I sat in the browning, pulsing light, and some animal part of me knew, and the rest of me said generator, said storm, said don't borrow trouble. The third sign was Whitfield, going quiet, going dreamy, staring at nothing and smiling a little, but I've already told you about Whitfield. The first one it took from inside the boat was Sean. He'd gone down to the factory deck to check the fish holds, make sure the catch we had wasn't shifting and throwing off our trim, which in that sea was a real worry. A hold full of loose fish sliding to one side can roll a boat over. Normal job. Right thing to do. He went down the ladder into the factory around 2 in the afternoon, and he didn't come back up, and after 20 minutes Rennick sent Whitfield down after him. And after 10 more minutes, Whitfield came back up the ladder white as the belly of a fish, and he couldn't talk. He just stood at the top of the ladder with his mouth working, and Rennick grabbed him and said, What is it?" And Whitfield said, "Sean's not down there." "What do you mean he's not down there?" Rennick said. "He's got to be down there. Where's he going to go?" "He's not down there," Whitfield said again. "His boots are down there. His boots are standing by the number 2 hold, standing up, laced. But he's not in them, Skip. His boots are standing there empty and laced, and there's water. There's a lot of water down there, and it's not seawater, it's..." And he turned and was sick. Right there at the top of the ladder, and Rennick looked at me, and I looked at Rennick, and something passed between us, some old sea knowledge that neither of us had words for, and Rennick said, low, so Whitfield wouldn't hear, "Cal, go get the shotgun out of my cabin, the deck gun. Go get it now, and don't let the boys see you do it." And I went and got the shotgun, and that's when I stopped being able to tell myself it was the storm. The gun was an old pump 12-gauge Rennick kept for sea lions, for the big bulls that'll come up on the gear and tear a net to ribbons taking the catch, and it was loaded with slugs. And I brought it up out of his cabin, and I brought a box of shells too, and I did it all with my hands shaking, and I want to tell you why my hands were shaking, because it wasn't just fear. It was that on the way to Rennick's cabin, in the narrow passage that runs past the factory ladder, I'd heard something come up out of the factory deck below. Not Sean, not a man, a sound. A wet, heavy, dragging, sliding sound. The sound the net had made coming down onto the deck, that slithering weight, and under it a smell had come up the ladder, and I knew the smell. I'd smelled it once already that day. It was the smell that had come up off the egg. That warm, low, rotten, living smell, out of place in all that cold. And it was up in the boat now. It was inside the hull with us. And I stood in the passage with the shotgun in my hands, and I listened to it move around down there in the dark of the factory deck, unhurried, at home, and I understood that we had brought something aboard, that it had come up out of 2,000 feet of black water curled inside a leather shell, and that it had hatched in the storm on our deck and found its way inside, out of the cold it hated and into the warm box full of soft, slow creatures it could feed on, and that it had already eaten one of us and left his boots standing laced on the deck. I want to describe what took Sean, and I can't, because I never saw all of it at once. None of us ever did, and I've come to believe that's part of what it was, that it was a thing you couldn't see all of at once, the way you can't see all of a room in the dark with a match. But I saw pieces. Over the hours that followed, I saw pieces, and I'll give you the pieces, and you can build it in your own head the way I've had to build it in mine for the 12 years since. It was pale, egg pale, deep thing pale, the color of something that has never once been touched by light. It was big, and it got bigger. I swear this is true. I swear it on Denny's heart. It got bigger over the hours we were trapped with it. It grew, it fed, and it grew. And a thing that came out of an egg the size of a truck tire was, by the end of that night, bigger than a man, bigger than 2 men. It moved wet and boneless, the slithering drag, but it had arms, or things like arms, long and pale and many-jointed, too many joints. And it had those cold lights along it that pulsed slow like the egg had pulsed. And it had a face. No, it didn't have a face. That's what I have to be careful about. It had a place where a face should be, a soft, busy, pale place, and I only ever saw that part once, at the very end. And I've spent 12 years trying to forget it, and I'm not going to put it in your head too. Some things you carry so other people don't have to. I've decided that's what a man is for, at the end. Before I brought the gun up, I went down the factory ladder. I don't know why. I've asked myself that 100 times, and the only answer I've got is that I had to see it, that a man can't act on a thing he hasn't seen, that some stubborn part of me refused to believe Whitfield until my own eyes made me. So I went down the ladder, 3 rungs, 4, with the shotgun in one hand and the other on the rail, down into the factory deck where the smell was thick enough to chew, and I stopped when my head came level with the deck, and I looked, and Whitfield had told it true. Sean's boots were standing by the number 2 hold, standing up, laced. The way boots stand when a foot is in them, except no foot was in them. They just stood there on the wet steel deck, 2 brown rubber deck boots laced neat, and above them nothing. No Sean, no sign of Sean, no blood even. That was the thing that turned my legs to water. There was no blood. A man doesn't come out of his boots and leave them standing laced and not leave any blood. It isn't possible. It breaks a rule so deep in a man that seeing it broken shakes something loose in you that never fully seats again. And around the boots, spreading across the factory deck, catching the browning pulse of the lights, was the water Whitfield had talked about, a slick of it. and it wasn't seawater. Seawater is cold and clean, and this was the other thing. This was thick and faintly warm, and it steamed a little in the cold air the way the fish around the egg had steamed, and it had a sheen on it like oil. Colors moving in it, and where it spread it had eaten the paint off the deck. I could see the bright bare steel coming through where the stuff had touched, and I understood that whatever the thing was, its body carried something that unmade what it touched, that dissolved paint, and I made myself not finish the thought. Standing on that ladder, I made myself not think about what it did to Sean, but I've thought about it since, every day, and I think that's why there was no blood. And then, from the dark at the far end of the factory, past the reach of the pulsing lights, something moved, slid. That wet, heavy, dragging weight, the net sound, and two of the cold blue-green lights came on in the dark down there and swung toward me, slow, the way a man turns his head toward a sound, and I understood the lights were on it, were part of it, and that it had felt me on the ladder the way it had felt Sean, the way it felt all of us, warm and soft and slow. And I went up that ladder faster than a 51-year-old man with ruined knees has any right to move up and out. And I didn't stop until I was back in Rennick's cabin with my back against the bulkhead and my heart trying to come up my throat, and that's where I got the gun. And that's the picture I carried up to the wheelhouse behind my eyes. 2 brown boots standing laced and empty in a spreading slick of steaming water that ate the paint off the deck, and 2 cold lights swinging toward me out of the dark. I brought the gun up to the house. Rennick took it, checked it, handed it back to me. "You're the steadiest," he said, which was a strange thing to hear at 51 from a man I'd have called the steadiest myself. But I took it, because when a skipper hands you a job, you take it. "It's down in the factory," I told him, low. "I heard it. It's big, Skip, and it smells like the egg." And Rennick nodded, slow. And I saw him decide something. Saw him do the arithmetic that skippers have to do. The arithmetic of how many men are left and how to keep the most of them alive. And it's a terrible arithmetic, and it ages a man in front of you. And Rennick aged in front of me right there in the wheelhouse with the storm screaming outside. "Boado's still in the engine room," he said. "It's below the factory. The engine room, 1 deck down. If that thing's in the factory, it's between us and Boado." He keyed the intercom. "Boado! Boado! You there? Static! The storm!" Then, thin and small, Boado's voice. "Here, Skipper. Engine's good." "Loud down here. What's—" And then his voice changed. Went flat and careful the way a voice does when a man has just seen something over your shoulder. And he said, "Skipper. Something's on the ladder. Something's coming down the ladder from the factory. Skipper, it's not Sean." And Rennick grabbed the mic and said, "Boado, get out of there. Get up the aft ladder. Go aft. Go up and aft. Get out." And there was a sound through the intercom then that I've never been able to unhear. A sound I'm not going to write down. And then the intercom went dead, and Boado with it. And the old diesel down in the engine room ran on and on with nobody left to talk to it. And that was 2 of us gone. 4 left. Me, Rennick, Whitfield, and the thing. You'd think we'd have had a plan. 4 grown men, one of them with 60 years at sea, one of them holding a shotgun loaded with sea lion slugs, against one animal, however strange. But you have to understand what it's like. The boat was pitching so hard we couldn't stand without holding on. The noise was so total we couldn't hear it coming. The lights kept browning out as the generator surged, dropping us into black for 2-3 seconds at a time and then coming back. And every time they came back, we all flinched and looked around the little space of the wheelhouse. Sure, it would be in there with us, and it never was, not yet, and the waiting for it was its own kind of dying, and Whitfield had come apart. Losing Pruitt had cracked him, and losing Sean had opened the crack wide, and he sat in the corner of the wheelhouse with his knees up talking, low and steady, and what he was saying was the worst part, because he wasn't talking to us, he was talking to it. "It's okay," he was saying, in that soft, dreaming voice he'd used over the egg. "It's okay. You came a long way. You came all the way up. It's cold up here, isn't it? You're cold." "It's okay." And Rennick told him to shut up, sharp, and Whitfield looked at him with eyes that weren't quite Whitfield's anymore and said, "It's lonely, Skip. Can't you feel how lonely it is? It's been down there in the dark all by itself since before there were people. It just once," and Rennick crossed the wheelhouse and slapped him, once, hard, and Whitfield stopped and started to cry and became Whitfield again, and I understood something then that chilled me worse than anything the thing itself had done. It got into your head. That's what the lights were for, I think, or the smell, or something coming off it I don't have a name for. It got into the soft part of a man's mind, the lonely part, the part that wants to be needed, and it turned that part toward itself, and Whitfield had a lot of that part. Whitfield was all soft, lonely kindness, and it had found him, and it was working on him, reaching up through the decks of the boat, through the storm, into the one man aboard most likely to open a door for it. That's why he'd said, "Don't put it over the side." That's why the cold agreeing thing had turned over in me for 1 second at the rail. It had touched all of us a little. It had touched Whitfield a lot. "Skipper," I said, "we have to think about Whitfield." "I know it," Rennick said. He said it so quietly I barely heard it over the storm. "We made a plan, such as it was. We would hole up in the wheelhouse, which had one door and could be dogged shut, and we would ride out the storm. And when the weather broke, we would get on the life raft, and we would leave the Marie Delacroix and everything in her to the thing. Let it have the boat, let it have the whole cursed catch. And we would take our chances in a raft on the open sea rather than spend 1 more hour in a steel box with it. That was the plan. Wait for the weather. It was a good plan. It's the plan I'd make again. And it didn't survive the night, because plans made by men don't account for a thing that gets into the mind of one of the men, and around what must have been 2 in the morning, in one of the black seconds when the generator dropped and the lights went out, Whitfield opened the wheelhouse door. I felt the cold and the storm roar come in, and I knew what had happened before the lights came back. When they came back, Whitfield was standing in the open door with the wind and the spray blasting in around him, and past him, in the dark of the passage, the lights of the thing were coming. That cold blue-green throb, coming up the passage toward the open door Whitfield had opened for it, and Whitfield had his arms a little out from his sides, open, welcoming, and he was saying, "It's okay, come in, it's okay, you don't have to be alone." And Rennick screamed his name, and I brought the gun up, and I want to tell you I did the right thing, the brave thing, the thing that would have saved us. But I didn't, because you cannot shoot a thing you cannot see all of, and it was behind Whitfield, and Whitfield was in the door. And by the time I had any kind of shot, Whitfield wasn't in the door anymore. It took him through the door, out into the storm, fast, faster than the wave had taken Pruitt. 1 second he was standing there with his arms open saying, "You don't have to be alone," and the next the door was empty, and the storm was howling through it, and Whitfield was gone, out into the black, given. And I never fired, and I've never been able to decide whether that was mercy or cowardice, whether not putting a slug through Whitfield to get at the thing behind him made me a good man or just a slow one. Rennick got the door dogged. The 2 of us threw ourselves against it and got it shut and dogged against the storm and the thing, and then it was just the 2 of us, an old skipper and an old deckhand, in a wheelhouse, with a shotgun and 3 shells left in it, and the storm outside, and the thing outside the storm, and my grandson 400 miles away with a hole in his heart, and I remember thinking, so clearly it was almost calm, I am not going to fix it. I am going to die out here, and Denny is not going to get his heart fixed, and my daughter is going to bury her father and her son both, and it will be because I stayed on this boat 1 week too long for money. That's what I thought, dogging that door, not about the thing, about the boy. It talked to us in the hours before dawn. That's the thing I've never told anybody, not even Rennick, though Rennick heard it too, and we never once spoke of it, not in 12 years, not at his deathbed. Some things 2 men agree to leave in the dark by never touching them. The intercom had gone dead when it took Boado. The engine room station was gone. The factory station was gone. The whole intercom should have been dead. and around 3 in the morning it crackled to life, and Sean's voice came out of it. "Uncle Ren?" it said. Sean's voice, exactly Sean's voice, the big soft kid trying to be hard, only now it was small and scared and young. "Uncle Ren, I'm hurt. I'm down in the factory and I'm hurt bad and I can't move. Please come get me. Please, Uncle Ren, don't leave me down here." And Rennick's face, I watched a thing happen to Rennick's face that I hope I never see happen to another man's. I watched 60 years of hard sea sense go to war with an uncle's love, right there in the pulsing dark, and his hand actually came up off the chart table, actually started toward the door. Before I got hold of his arm, "It's not him, Skip," I said. "You know it's not him. Bodo's station is dead. That intercom's dead. It's not him." And Rennick looked at me with wet eyes and said, "But what if it is? What if he's hurt down there and I leave him?" And the voice came again, "Uncle Ren, please." And it was perfect. It was so perfect. And that was how I knew for certain it was a lie, because it was too perfect. Because the real Sean stammered when he was scared and this Sean didn't. This Sean had Sean's voice, but not Sean's fear in it. It had learned the sound of him, but not the soul of him, the way a bird learns to say words it doesn't understand. "It ate him," I said, as gentle as I could say a thing that cruel. "It ate him, Skip, and it took his voice the way it took his, the way it takes everything. It's using him to open the door. Same as it used Whitfield. It knows we won't open the door for a monster, so it's being Sean." And Rennick put his face in his hands, and the voice went on for a while. Sean, and then Boado, and then, worst of all, near the end, it tried Pruitt, it tried Whitfield. It ran through all 4 of them, one after another, calling to us out of the dead intercom in their own perfect voices, a whole drowned crew begging to be let in. And Rennick and I sat in the dark and held on to each other's arms and did not open the door, and I have never in my life done anything harder, and I hope I never have to again, because part of me wanted to. That's the thing about it, the deepest cruelty of it. Part of me wanted to open the door to that drowned chorus, not because I believed them, but because I was so tired, so cold, so scared, and the voices were so warm and they wanted me so badly. And the wanting reached down into that same soft, lonely place it had found in Whitfield, and it pulled, and I understood then that there was a little Whitfield in every man alive, a little door that wants to be opened, and that the only thing that had saved me, and not him, was that I had Denny. I had a 7-year-old boy with a hole in his heart on the far side of that ocean, and every time the voices pulled at my door, I thought about the boy and the door held. Whitfield didn't have a Denny. That's all it was, at the end. Whitfield was all alone in the world, and it found that out, and it opened him up. I had one small hand to hold on to 400 miles away, and it held me shut. It came for the wheelhouse near dawn. The storm had started to ease, that's the cruelty of it. The storm that had trapped us was finally letting go. The seas were coming down, the wind had backed off. The gray light was starting to come up in the east, and we'd almost made it. We'd almost made it to the weather breaking and the raft, and a chance, when the thing decided it was done waiting. It didn't come through the door. We'd braced for the door. It came up through the deck. There's a hatch in the wheelhouse floor, a small inspection hatch down to the electronic space below, and I'd forgotten about it. We'd both forgotten about it, and it came up through there. It had found its way up through the guts of the boat, and it came up through the wheelhouse floor in the gray dawn light, and I finally saw it, all of it, all at once, the thing I said I wouldn't describe, and I'll keep that promise. I'll only tell you that it was pale, and it was huge now, huge, filling the whole after part of the wheelhouse, and the place where its face should have been was working, busy, soft, and the cold lights ran all over it, and it smelled of the freezer and the tide and the grave, and it reached for Rennick with one of the long, many-jointed pale arms. Because Rennick was closest, Rennick had put himself closest, I understood that in the same instant, The old man had put himself between it and me the way he'd put himself between his crew and every bad sea for 60 years, and I brought up the shotgun and I fired. I fired all 3 shells. The first one, I don't know where it went. The second one hit the pale mass of it, and it made a sound, not a scream, not anything an animal makes. A sound like the boat itself groaning. A sound that came up through my boots as much as through my ears, and it flinched. The whole huge pale length of it flinched and drew back, and where the slug went in, a black stuff came out, not blood. Black and thick and cold looking, and I understood it could be hurt. It could be hurt. It was flesh. Whatever kind of flesh it was, it could be hurt. And I racked the pump and I fired the third and last shell into the place where its face should have been, point blank, close enough that I felt the cold of it on my face, and it came apart, not all of it. But that part came apart, and it went back down through the hatch it had come up through, fast, wounded, that terrible groaning coming up through the whole boat, back down into the dark of the hull. And Rennick was on the floor, and I got him up, and we went out the wheelhouse door into the gray breaking dawn, and we got the life raft off its cradle and into the water, and we went over the side into it, the 2 of us, 2 old men, and we cut ourselves loose from the Marie Delacroix, and we paddled away from her into the settling sea, with the last of the storm blowing itself out around us, and we watched the boat get small behind us, our boat, with the thing still in her, wounded, in the dark of her hull, and neither of us said a word. We drifted away from her in the gray morning, and we watched her until she was gone under the swell, and the whole time I kept the empty shotgun across my knees, empty, 3 shells fired, nothing left in it. And I kept it there anyway because a man needs something to hold, and I watched the water around the raft. That was the longest part. Not the boat, not the thing coming up through the floor, not the voices in the dark. The longest part was the 11 hours in the raft afterward, when it was over, when we were away, and I could not stop watching the water. Every time the raft rode up a swell, I looked down into the trough on the far side, into the gray-green water. Sure, I'd see the cold lights coming up under us. Sure, it wasn't done. Sure, it would rise out of 2 miles of dark and take the raft the way it had taken everything else. It never came. It stayed with the boat, wounded, in the dark of the hull, or it went back down to the deep where it was made. I'll never know which. And the not knowing rode in the raft with us the whole 11 hours, and it's ridden with me every day since. Rennick didn't watch the water. Rennick lay in the bottom of the raft with his eyes shut, not asleep, just shut. An old man who had spent everything he had and had nothing left to spend on watching, and I watched for both of us. And I've gone on watching for both of us ever since he died, watching the water, waiting. The Coast Guard found us 11 hours later, a cutter out of Kodiak that had come north the second the weather let them, and they pulled us out of the raft half dead with cold, and they asked us what happened. And Rennick, before I could say a word, Rennick said the words that we both told from then on, the words that are in the official report, the words that let the families have their grief clean. He said, "We took a rogue sea, lost 4 men over the side in the blow. Cal and I got the raft off. A rogue sea, 4 men lost overboard in heavy weather. It happens. It happens every year out there, good boats and good crews swallowed by a bad sea, and nobody questions it, and nobody launched an investigation, and nobody went looking for the Marie Delacroix, which was still afloat when we left her, drifting, with her engine running and her lights on and a wounded thing in her hold, 400 miles off Kodiak and 2 miles of water. She was never found. They put her down as lost with the 4 men in the October storm. Sometimes a boat just doesn't come back. Everybody out there knows a boat that just didn't come back. I got Denny's money. That's the part nobody would believe if I told them. The part that sounds like a lie. But it's true, the trip settled out. The insurance. The crew shares of the 2 thin toes we did land before it all went wrong. My 2.5 seasons of wages. And it came to just enough. Just barely enough. And my daughter's boy had his heart fixed at the Children's Hospital in Anchorage the spring after. And he's 19 now. And he's got a good strong heart in him. and he doesn't know that his grandfather traded 4 good men and a boat and his own sleep for the rest of his life to pay for it. He thinks his grandpa was a fisherman who got out of the business after a bad storm. That's close enough to true, and I'll let him keep it, the way you let the young ones keep the clean version of things. Rennick died 4 years ago. Cancer, in a bed, on land, which is a better death than the sea was ever going to give him, and better than either of us had any right to expect. I went to see him at the end. He was down to nothing, gray and small in the hospital bed, and I sat with him, and near the end, when the nurses had gone out, he opened his eyes and looked at me clearer than he'd been in days, and he said, "Cal, you ever think about how it's still out there?" And I said, "I try not to, Skip." And he said, "It grew. The whole time it was on the boat, it grew. It fed, and it grew." And I said, "I know it." And he said, "That was a baby, Cal. That thing that took 4 of my crew and near took the both of us. That was the thing that came out of the egg. That was the baby." And then he closed his eyes, and he didn't open them again, and I sat there and held his hand and thought about the size of the egg, and the size of the thing that had laid it. Down there in the 2 miles of dark on the deep edge of the shelf, waiting, and I thought about how the whole storm, the whole terrible night, all 4 of those good men, all of it, was just about one baby, one lost baby that we'd hauled up out of the deep in a net, and about the mother that laid it, still down there, and about how she'd never once come up looking for it, and about how maybe the reason she never came up looking is that she didn't need to, that she knew, the way things down there know things, that her child had found its own way into the warm world, and would grow, and would come back to her when it was ready, bigger, having learned in the world of light and boats and soft, slow men exactly what it needed to learn. People ask me sometimes why an old fisherman moved to Montana, of all places. A man who spent his whole life on salt water gone to live where the biggest water is a trout stream. I tell them my knees gave out and I wanted mountains, and that's true enough to end it. I don't go near the water anymore. I live in Montana now, about as far from either ocean as a man can get in this country, in a little house with a view of mountains and not one drop of open water bigger than a stock pond, and most days I'm all right. But some nights, in the fall, when the wind comes down off the mountains and works at the house the way the sea worked at the Marie's hull, I lie awake and I think about the deep edge of the shelf, and the 2 miles of black under it, and the mother of the thing that took my crew, lying down there in the dark, patient, in no hurry at all, waiting for her child to grow up and come home to her out of the world of light. And I think about how her child is out there somewhere, grown now, 12 years grown, big now, so big, moving through the deep between the 2 worlds, and I think, most of all, about how it learned to get into the soft, lonely part of a man's mind and open him up from the inside, how it did that when it was only a day old and the size of a calf. And I think about what it can do now that it's had 12 years to grow, and I hope, I pray, to whatever's out past the mountains and the sea, that it never gets hungry for the world of light, that it stays down there in the dark with its mother where it belongs, that it stays quiet. But it grew. I keep coming back to that. Everything down there has all the time in the world, and it grew, and it's still out there, and it learned us. It learned what we are. It learned how we open. And I lie awake in Montana, 400 miles of dry land in every direction, and I listen to the wind work at the house, and I hold on to the thought of my grandson's good, strong heart the way I held on to it in the wheelhouse, the way it once held me shut, and I wait for it not to be the wind. Story 3, The Third Diver. The voice came up the comms at 40 minutes into the dive and said my name, and the thing about it was that it wasn't Reyes, and it wasn't the bell, and it wasn't topside, because I knew all 3 of those voices better than I knew my own, and this was a 4th voice, a voice that had no business being on our circuit 510 feet down in the black water off the Louisiana shelf. And it said, Wade, just my name, soft, close, right in my ear inside the helmet, and I stopped with my glove on the wellhead flange and I keyed my mic and I said, "Say again for Wade," and the only thing that came back was the sound of my own breathing and the hiss of the gas, and way down under it, so faint I told myself I imagined it, something that might have been somebody laughing without any air to laugh with. Let me back up, because if I just tell you the scary part, you won't feel it, and I need somebody to feel it. I've carried this 8 years and I've never told it right, and I'm going to try to tell it right one time. My name's Wade Fontenot. I'm a commercial saturation diver, or I was, out of Morgan City, Louisiana. And if you don't know what a saturation diver is, I'll tell you. Because you need to understand the box we live in before you'll understand why the box got so bad. When you work deep, real deep, 300, 400, 500 feet and more, you can't just dive down and come back up. Because your body soaks up the gas you breathe under pressure like a sponge soaks up water, and if you come up fast, it comes out of you in bubbles and kills you, screaming, bent in half, which is where the word "the bends" comes from. So for deep work, they do it different. They put you in a chamber on the boat, a steel tube not much bigger than a camper trailer, and they pressurize it down to the pressure you'll be working at, and they keep you there for weeks. You live in that tube, you and 3 or 4 other men, breathing helium that turns your voice into a cartoon duck, eating food they pass in through a lock, sleeping in bunks the size of coffins, and every day they lock you into a diving bell, a steel ball, and they lower the bell down to the job, and you lock out of the bell into the water and you work, and then you come back to the bell and they haul you up and you live in the tube some more. For a whole month you never see the sky. You're at pressure the entire time, in saturation, your body soaked full of gas, and the only way back to the world is a slow decompression at the end that takes days, bleeding the pressure off you an hour at a time so the gas comes out gentle and doesn't kill you. A month in a steel tube with 3 other men and no way out but slow. That's the job, that's the box. And it's a good job. It pays like nothing else a man from Morgan City with no college is ever going to see. And I was good at it, and I loved it. God help me. Right up until the job off Mississippi Canyon Block 219. I was 36 that year. I'd just come out the far side of a divorce that took the house and most of what was in it and left me sleeping on my brother's fold-out. And the truth is, I took the Block 219 job because I wanted the box. I wanted the tube. I wanted a month where the whole world was 4 men and a job and no phone that could ring with my ex-wife's lawyer on the other end. And I want to be honest about that. Because I think the deep knows when a man wants to disappear into it. I think that's part of what happened. I climbed down into that chamber wanting to vanish for a month, and something down there heard me wanting it, and it tried to grant the wish permanent. There were 4 of us in saturation. Me, a diver named Reyes, Danny Reyes, out of Corpus Christi, who'd been my bellmate on 6 jobs, and was the closest thing I had to a best friend in the world. A solid, quiet Tejano who'd been diving 20 years and had never once, not one time, done a thing in the water that scared me. And in that job, trust is everything. Your bellmate is the man who holds your life in his hands every single day, and I trusted Danny Reyes with mine the way you trust your own hands. There was an older diver named Pickett, gray and sour and superstitious, who'd been in the game since the wild early days when men died on these jobs all the time, and there was a young one, a kid named Aubrey on his first sat job, eager and green, 4 men in the tube. And topside, running us, a dive supervisor named Coker who sat in the dive control van with his charts and his gas panels and his voice in our ears, the man who was our whole connection to the surface. Our God and our mother both, the voice that told us when to lock out and when to come home. The job was decommissioning. There's a lot of it in the Gulf now, old platforms from the 70s and 80s that have sucked up all the oil they're going to and have to come down, and it's careful, ugly work. Cutting and capping and sealing, 500 feet down in the dark. Block 219 was an old one, older than the paperwork admitted, I found out later. It had been built in the early 70s out on the edge where the shelf starts to break toward the deep Gulf, toward the Sigsbee, toward water that goes down 2 miles and more, and it sat right on the lip. The platform did, in 510 feet, with the shelf edge dropping away just to the south of it into the real deep. And that placement, that edge, is the thing I keep coming back to. We were working right on the doorstep of the deep Gulf, right where the shallow world ends. And whatever came up the comms that day at 40 minutes, I've come to believe it came up out of that doorway, up the slope from the 2 miles of dark just to the south, drawn to the lights and the noise and the 4 warm men breathing helium on the edge of its country. I should tell you what the box does to a man, because you have to feel the box to feel the rest. The first day in saturation is almost fun, in a grim way. 4 grown men crammed into a steel tube laughing at each other's helium duck voices, everybody a cartoon. And then the novelty wears off around hour 6 and the tube starts to close on you. It's the smallness that gets you first. You can't stand up straight. You can't take 3 steps in a line. Everything is arm's reach. And your bunk is a padded shelf you slide into like a body into a drawer. Then it's the sameness. The light never changes. There's no morning. Coker calls it morning over the box, and you take his word for it because there's no other clock but his voice. You eat what comes through the medical lock, food that's gone flat because your sense of taste goes flat under all that helium, everything like eating with a cold. You can't whistle, helium won't let you. You can't have a hot cup of coffee the way you like it because the heat and the pressure do strange things. Your body's confused the whole time, deep down confused, a low animal wrongness of being pressed on from every side by a weight it can't see. And the worst of it, the part nobody who hasn't done it understands, is that there is no door. There's a hatch, but the hatch might as well be welded shut, because opening it would kill you, and every cell of you knows it, and so you live for a month in a room your own body will not let you leave. And something in the back of a man's mind never stops screaming very quietly about that, the whole time, for weeks. Most divers make their peace with it. You have to do the work. But it takes a certain kind of man to make that peace. A man who's good at being shut in, good at going still inside himself. And I was that kind of man. And I've thought a lot about why, and I don't like the answer. My daddy was that kind of man too. He wasn't a diver, he worked the rigs, rough-necked out of Morgan City his whole life, but he was a man who could go still and shut. A quiet, hard man who'd had something shut down in him young and never opened it back up. And he raised me to be able to sit in a small, dark space and not fight it, though he never meant to teach me that. He taught it just by being what he was in a small house with too many silences in it. And when my marriage came apart, and it came apart because of the diving, mostly, because a man who's gone a month at a time and comes back shut and quiet is a hard man to stay married to. My wife told me that on the way out, she said, "You're already gone, Wade. You've been gone for years. You just take your body with you now," and then when it came apart, I did the thing my daddy would have done. I went still and shut, and I signed up for the longest sack job I could find, and I climbed down into that tube honestly glad to be shut in. Glad to have the whole world reduced to 4 men and a job and no room in it for grief. I told you that already. I'm telling you again because it matters, because I've come to believe the deep is drawn to that, to men who want to disappear into a small dark place, that it can smell the wish on us. And I climbed down into Block 219 with the wish all over me like cheap cologne, and something on the edge of the deep gulf caught the scent of a man who wanted to vanish, and it came up the slope to grant it. But I'm getting ahead again. I do that with this story. Let me tell you about the wreck, because the wreck is where it starts. 6 days into the job, cutting away the old riser guards on the south side of the platform, Danny and I found the wreck. It wasn't on any chart. That's the first wrong thing, and Coker topside got real quiet when we called it up, and I understand now why he got quiet, though at the time I just thought he was busy. There was a boat down there. A workboat, a crew boat maybe, 100 feet of steel sitting on the bottom in the mud just south of the platform, right at the point where the shelf starts to tilt down toward the deep, and it was old, crusted over with 40 years of growth, and it sat upright in the mud like it had been set down gentle, and when our lights hit it, the first thing I felt wasn't fear, it was sadness. This deep, unexpected grief, because a sunk boat is a grave, always, and you feel it the way you feel a graveyard at night, a quiet that's got weight to it. "Coker, we got a wreck down here," Danny called up in his helium duck voice, and there was a pause, a long pause, and then Coker said, "Flat, copy, stay off it, it's not part of the job." Stay off the wreck and finish the riser guards, and Danny and I looked at each other through our faceplates, and Danny keyed his mic, his private mic, diver to diver. The channel topside can't hear, and he said he knew that was there, and I said, "What?" And Danny said, "Coker." He didn't ask a single question. Wrote down a wreck, that's not on the chart, and didn't ask one question. He knew it was there, Wade. They all knew, and a cold went through me that had nothing to do with the water, which was already trying to freeze me through my hot water suit. And I looked at that boat sitting in the mud on the edge of the deep, and I thought, that's a thing they don't talk about topside. And I was right, and I wish to God I'd left it right there. But you don't leave it, do you? You never leave it. That's the whole story of everything bad that ever happened to a curious man. That night meaning the hours they let us sleep, there's no night in the tube, just the dimming of the lights. I asked Pickett about it. Old Pickett, who'd been diving the Gulf since before I was born. I said, "Pickett, there's a wreck off the south side of 219. Crew boat, looks like. Old one. Coker told us to stay off it and didn't want to talk about it. You know anything?" And Pickett, who was lying in his coffin bunk with his eyes closed, didn't open them, and for a long while I thought he'd gone to sleep, and then he said, in that helium voice that should have been funny and wasn't, that'd be the Cherami. And I said, "The what?" And he said, "Bo Cherami's boat. 1981, 82, around there. They lost a whole dive crew off this block. Before saturation was what it is now, back when it was cowboy work and men died and the company wrote it off. There was a blowout, or a collapse, something on the old wellhead, and it took the boat down, and it took the divers that were down, and he stopped. They never recovered the divers. Company said they did, put names on a memorial in Morgan City. You've walked past it 100 times, but the divers are still down there, son, all 3 of them. They've been down there on the edge of the deep for 40 years, and everybody in the business knows it, and nobody says it. And the company put 219 back to work anyway because there was oil under it. And now they're taking it down, and here we are. He opened his eyes then, in the dim red light of the tube, and he looked at me, and he said, "You didn't go on that wreck, did you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Don't. Whatever else you do on this job, don't you go on that boat, and don't you go looking for what's in it. Because it's been waiting 40 years for somebody to come back down and pay it some mind, and it don't want flowers, boy. It's been down there in the dark too long to want flowers." And he closed his eyes again and wouldn't say another word, and Aubrey, the kid, was staring from his bunk with big eyes. And Danny across the tube had gone still, and I lay in my coffin that night at 510 feet of pressure with helium in my blood, and I couldn't sleep, and I listened to the tube tick and hum. And I thought about 3 men who'd been in the water for 40 years, right below me, in the dark, on the edge of the deep. 3 divers, remember that, 3. There were 4 days between the wreck and the voice, and they weren't quiet days. I just didn't know yet how to read what they were telling me. Small things. The kind of small things a working diver files under fatigue and bad gas and the general strangeness of living pressed at the bottom of the sea, because those are real explanations and they're always there to reach for. My hot water suit started running cold in patches, cold spots that moved, and the topside techs checked the heater and the hose and found nothing, and I dove cold and told myself it was a kink in the line. The lights on the structure would dim when I worked the south side, the side toward the wreck, toward the drop, dim like something was drinking them, and brighten again when I moved north. And twice, working alone in the cone of my light with the black all around, I got the feeling every diver knows the feeling. It's the oldest feeling there is, the feeling of being watched, of a weight of attention on the back of my neck from out in the dark where my light didn't reach. And both times I turned, slow, and swung my light out into the black, and both times there was nothing, just the dark eating the light at 15 feet. And both times, the moment I turned back to my work, the feeling came right back, stronger, closer. And the umbilical, I have to tell you about the umbilical, because for a diver the umbilical is everything. It's the cord, it's gas and heat and comms and the only road home. And you are aware of it every second the way you're aware of your own spine. And on the third of those 4 days, working the south side, I felt my umbilical move. Not the ordinary drift and sway of it in the current. A pull, a slow, deliberate tug, twice, from down current, from the direction of the wreck. The exact kind of tug you'd feel if someone had taken hold of your umbilical way out in the dark and given it 2 gentle pulls, the way you'd tug a rope to see if anybody was on the other end, the way you'd knock on a door, tug, tug, testing. Is anybody home? And I keyed my mic and I said, Danny, you on my umbilical? You messing with my hose? And Danny said, I'm 40 feet off you on the other side of the structure, Wade. I can't reach your hose. And we both went quiet, and I felt it again. Tug, tug, patient. From the dark down the slope, something on the far end of my lifeline saying, hello? And I reeled in the slack fast and got in close to the steel and finished my work with my back against the structure so nothing could get behind me. And I told topside my hose had snagged, and they believed me. Because that's a thing that happens. And I let them believe it. Because the truth was already too big to say out loud, even to myself, even then. 4 days of that. 4 days of the deep clearing its throat, and me pretending not to hear, until it stopped clearing its throat and just spoke. The voice came 4 days after that. The fourth voice. The one that said Wade. I have to explain the comms, so you understand why it was impossible. A saturation diver's helmet has a hardwire circuit, a physical wire, run down through the umbilical, the big armored hose that connects you to the bell, that carries your breathing gas and your hot water and your comms and your depth line all in one bundle, your literal lifeline, the thing that if it parts, you die. The comms wire is part of that bundle. It goes from my helmet, down the umbilical to the bell, and from the bell up another umbilical to topside, to Coker in the van. There is no radio, there's no wireless, anything. Sound doesn't carry for spit and water and helium comms or a hard-wired circuit end to end, which means the only voices that can ever come into my helmet are voices from something physically wired into that circuit. Me, my bellmate Danny, whose umbilical runs to the same bell, the bellman tending us, and Coker topside. 4 possible voices, and I knew all 4, and the voice that said Wade was none of them. It came at 40 minutes into a dive on the wellhead, a routine seal inspection. Danny working 30 feet away from me on the other side of the structure. Both of us in the cone of our own lights, with the black pressing in all around, that total black of 500 feet where your light goes out maybe 15, 20 feet and then the dark just eats it. And above and below and all around is nothing, is the biggest nothing a man can be inside of, and you learn not to look at it. You learn to keep your eyes on your work and your hands and your gauges, and never let yourself really look at the dark, because the dark at 500 feet will get into you if you look at it too long. And I was not looking at it, I was looking at the flange in my hands, and the voice said, Wade, soft, close, inside the helmet, a man's voice, tired. And I said, say again for Wade, and got nothing back but breathing and that airless, not quite laugh. I keyed topside. Coker, Wade, you got somebody else patched into our circuit? I'm hearing a voice. Pause. Then Coker, careful. Negative, Wade. Just you, Danny, the bell, and me on this circuit. Say what you're hearing. Somebody said my name. Longer pause. And when Coker came back, his voice had changed, had gone tight and quiet the way it had gone quiet over the wreck. And he said, "Probably crosstalk off the structure. Steel carries sound funny. Finish your inspection and let's get you home." And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in crosstalk. But Danny's voice came on the private channel then, low, just for me. And Danny said, "Wade." I heard it too. It said your name and I heard it on my circuit. And Wade, and he stopped. And I said, "What, Danny, what?" And Danny said, "My light. Look at my light. Don't come over. Just look." I looked across the black at Danny's light, 30 feet off, and in the edge of it, at the very edge where his cone of light met the dark, there was a shape standing in the mud, just outside the reach of his light, still watching, the shape of a man in an old-style diving helmet, one of the big round brass-looking ones from the cowboy days, standing in the dark at the edge of my best friend's light, with the black of the deep gulf behind him, and while I watched, it lifted one arm, slow, and it pointed, not at Danny. Past Danny, it pointed south, down the slope, toward the deep, toward where the wreck of the Cherami sat on the edge of the drop. And then Danny moved his head and his light swung a few degrees and the shape wasn't there anymore. There was just mud and dark. And Danny said, "Real quiet, tell me you saw that." And I said I saw it. And Coker's voice cut in, sharp, having heard nothing but knowing something from the sound of us. "Divers, talk to me. What's going on down there?" And neither of us answered him for a second. And in that second, the fourth voice came again, into both our helmets, clear as a man standing between us. And it said, "You're standing on the roof of us. Come down and let us out." They aborted the dive. Coker heard the whole thing that time, heard the voice come through on the circuit, a voice that could not physically be on the circuit, and I heard the different quality in his own voice when he called us up. The sound of a man whose explanation just broke, and he said, "Bell divers, this dive is aborted. Return to the bell now." And we didn't argue. We went. We clipped our way back along our umbilicals, hand over hand through the black to the bell. And I want to tell you those 30 feet back to the bell were the longest of my life to that point. Because now that we'd seen it, I couldn't not look at the dark. And the whole way back I felt it, the attention of it. 3 men's worth of attention out there in the black, watching us go. And I got into the bell, and Danny got into the bell, and the bellman sealed the hatch, and they hauled us up and mated the bell to the chamber, and we transferred into the tube, back into saturation, back into the steel world of the 4 of us. And I thought, that's it, we're up, we're out of the water, whatever that was, it's down there and we're up here. I was wrong about the water keeping it out. That's the thing I didn't understand yet. When you're in saturation, you never really leave the deep. Your body's still at 500 feet of pressure. Your blood's still full of the deep. You're not up. You're just in a different room of the deep, a steel room they've hung in the air, and you're still at depth, still pressed, still soaked full of that dark. And the thing that had found us in the water had found us at pressure, had found the pressure in us, and the tube was at pressure, and so the tube was not the safe place I thought it was. The tube was just another room down there. And that night, in the tube, 5 men's worth of breathing filled that steel tube instead of 4, and it took me the longest time to be sure, lying in my coffin bunk in the red dark listening. But there were 5 men breathing in a tube built for 4, and only 4 of us were alive. Pickett knew right away. Old Pickett, when we transferred in and told it, went the color of the mud on the bottom, and he said, "You looked at it. I told you not to look at the wreck, and you looked, and now it's looked back." And I said, "Pickett, we didn't go near the wreck." And he said, "You didn't have to. You paid it mind. 40 years nobody paid it any mind, and you came down and paid it mind, and now it knows you're here, and worse, it knows you can hear it. Most crews can't hear it. Most crews, it's just cold spots and shapes at the edge of the light. But you two," he looked at me and Danny, "you two it can talk to. It found a door in you, and it's going to use it." And Aubrey, the kid, 24 years old on his first SAT job, started to cry, quiet, trying to hide it, and I felt worse for him than for myself. because at least I'd gone looking. At least I'd earned it, and the kid had just been in the wrong tube. Coker's voice came into the chamber over the box, topside, and Coker had made some decisions up there in his van. I could hear it, and he said, "Listen to me, all of you. I've called the company. We're pulling the plug on 219. But I can't bring you up." And the tube went dead silent. 5 breaths and only 4 men. And I keyed the box and I said, "What do you mean you can't bring us up?" And Coker said, "You're in saturation at 510 feet. I can't decompress you fast. You know that you come up fast at these pressures and you die, every one of you, worse than whatever's down there. Full deco from this depth is 4 days, 96 hours. I've got to bleed you up slow or I've got 4 dead men, and I will not make 4 dead men, so you have got to hold on down there for 4 days while I bring the pressure off you an hour at a time. 4 days. That's the fastest the human body allows. I'm sorry, there's no fast way home from where you are. 4 days. 96 hours, in a steel tube at pressure, with a thing that had come up out of the deep gulf and found the door in us, and no way out but slow, an hour of pressure at a time, 4 days of it, and the thing already in the tube with us, already breathing, and I lay in my coffin and did the math the way every man does when the number is that bad, and the math said, 4 days is a long time to be shut in a box with something that wants you to come down and let it out. The first day it was mostly the breathing, just the 5th breath in a tube built for 4. You'd lie in your bunk and count, and there'd be Danny's breath and Pickett's and Aubrey's and mine, and then one more, slow and wet and out of time with the rest. A breath that had water in it, a breath from a chest that had been full of the Gulf for 40 years, and when you sat up and looked, the tube was empty of anything but the 4 of us, 4 men in a steel tube. And the breathing went right on, the 5th breath, from nowhere, from the corner where the light was reddest, and you'd lie back down and put your hands over your ears, and you'd still hear it. Because it wasn't coming through your ears, it was coming through the pressure, through the gas in your own blood, and there's no covering your ears against a thing that's talking to the deep inside you. Coker kept the pressure bleeding off, an hour at a time, the numbers on the gauge crawling up toward the surface so slow you couldn't see them move, and Coker talked to us the whole time, kept a voice in the tube, good man. He knew what silence would do to us and he wouldn't let the silence in. He talked about nothing, about baseball, about his kids, about a fishing trip he was going to take us all on when we got up, and we knew he was doing it on purpose, and we loved him for it, and we held on to his voice like a rope. But Coker had to sleep sometimes. He had a relief supervisor, a younger man named Dwyer, who'd spell him for a few hours, and it was in Dwyer's watches that it got bad, because Dwyer didn't know to keep talking. Dwyer would go quiet in the van up top, and the quiet would come down the wire into the tube, and into the quiet the 4th voice would come. It talked to us about the wreck. It wanted us to understand. That was the thing. It wasn't just menace, it was need. It was 40 years of need, and on the 2nd day it started telling us, in that tired, wet voice, what had happened to them, how the wellhead had let go in 1981, and the mud and gas had come up and taken the boat down and pinned the 3 of them on the bottom, alive, in their suits, with their gas lines cut, and how it had taken them a long time to die, a long, slow time in the dark on the edge of the deep, waiting for a rescue that the company decided was too expensive to mount, and how they'd heard it on the comms before their own gas ran out. They'd heard the company decide. They'd heard a man in a van decide that 3 divers weren't worth the boat it would take to reach them, and they died knowing it, died abandoned on the doorstep of the deep gulf, and the deep gulf had taken them in the way the deep takes everything that dies on its edge, and it had kept them. And they had been down there for 40 years being kept, and now their own platform was being torn down over their heads by 4 more divers, and they were not going to let it happen again. They were not going to be left. They wanted up. They wanted out. They wanted, more than anything, for somebody to come down and let them out of the dark and we were the somebodies. We were the ones who could hear, and it would ask us, in the quiet of Dwyer's watches, so reasonable, so tired, so sad, come down and let us out. It's dark down here. We've been in the dark so long. Just come down and open the boat and let us out. Aubrey went for the hatch on the second night. The chamber's got a lock, a small chamber between the main tube and the bell, and a hatch. And the hatch is interlocked so you can't open it against pressure. You can't just walk out of a saturation chamber. The pressure would kill you and the interlocks won't let you, but a man who knows the system, or a man being told what to do by something that knows the system, can defeat the interlocks. And Aubrey, green as he was, had been trained on those interlocks the same as the rest of us. And on the second night I woke to the sound of the lock cycling, and I came up out of my bunk, and Aubrey was in the lock, in the little chamber. And he had the inner hatch shut behind him, and he was working the outer hatch controls with the fourth voice coming out of the speaker, soft and glad. That's it, come down and let us out. And if he'd gotten that outer hatch open against 500 feet of pressure, it wouldn't have just killed Aubrey. It would have explosively decompressed the whole chamber, killed all four of us in a half-second, blown us inside out. And I understand now that's what it wanted, that it didn't want one of us to come down. It wanted all of us to come down, dead, blown out into the deep to keep them company. 4 new divers for the dark, and Aubrey was the door it had found to do it. I got on the emergency talkback and screamed for Coker, and Coker came up out of his sleep in a half-second. That man, and Danny and Pickett and I got the inner hatch open before Aubrey could blow the outer one. And we dragged him back into the main tube, and he fought us. He fought like a man being pulled back from something he loved, and his eyes were wrong, gone soft and deep, and not Aubrey. And it took all 3 of us to hold him down while Coker talked him back, and slowly the kid came back into his own eyes and started to sob, and said he didn't know why he did it, said the voice was so sad, said he just wanted to help them. And Pickett, holding the kid's arm, looked at me over his head, and I knew what the look meant. It meant the kid was the weak point. It meant the thing had found the easiest door, and it would keep going back to that door, and there were 2 days of decompression left, 48 hours. And the kid could not be trusted near the lock for 1 second of it, and there were only 4 of us to watch each other, and we were all going to have to stop sleeping. And no man goes without sleep for 48 hours in his right mind, and the thing knew that. The thing had all the time in the world, and it knew that all it had to do was wait for us to get tired, the same way it had waited 40 years, because waiting was the one thing it was better at than anything alive. We set watches, 2 awake, 2 asleep, and the 2 awake watched the lock and watched the 2 asleep and watched each other, and Coker stayed on the box around the clock now. He'd sent Dwyer home. He wouldn't leave us. He ran on coffee and I don't know what else, and he kept his voice in the tube, and we bled the pressure off an hour at a time, and the deep worked on us the whole way up. It learned. That was the worst discovery. It wasn't just 3 drowned divers repeating their grief. It learned. It adapted. It tried different doors. When it couldn't get Aubrey to the lock with sadness, it tried me with anger. It started talking to me in the quiet about my ex-wife. Things it couldn't have known, things nobody knew. The specific words she'd said the day she left, and I understood it was reaching into me the way it reached into the pressure, down into the soaked-in dark of me. Reading the griefs I'd brought down into the tube wanting to disappear, and it played them back, and it said, "There's nothing up there for you, Wade. You came down here to get away from all that. We know. We felt you wanting it. Come down. Come all the way down. You can disappear for good down here. No lawyers in the deep, no empty house, just the quiet, just the dark, just us. Come down and let us out and we'll let you disappear the way you wanted." And the worst part, the part I've never said out loud until now, is that for whole minutes at a time it sounded good. Lying in my coffin at pressure with my life in pieces up top, the offer of the deep sounded like rest. That's how it works. It doesn't force the door. It finds the man who's already got his hand on the latch and it just leans on him, patient for as long as it takes. Danny is what saved me those 2 days. Danny Reyes, my bellmate, the man I trusted with my life in the water, saved it in the tube too, because every time I'd go quiet and start listening to the deep, Danny would be there, would put his hand on my chest, would say my name in his own voice, his real voice, and say, "Wade, stay up here with me, brother. You got nothing to disappear from that we can't fix up top. Stay with me." And I did the same for him, because it was working on Danny too. It worked on all of us. And the two of us kept each other in the light of the tube by main strength, taking turns being the strong one. And I thought, if we can just do this for each other for 48 more hours, we'll make it. All we have to do is not let go of each other. And I want to tell you we made it clean, all 4 of us. But you already know we didn't, because I already told you there were 3 divers down there, and there's a reason I keep telling you that number. On the 3rd day it showed itself to us, and that was almost worse than the voice, because a voice you can tell yourself is in your head, and this was not in our heads. The chamber has a viewport, a little thick round window of laminated glass in the side of the tube, so the folks topside can look in on you, check you're alive, check you're not coming apart. And there's not much to see out of it from the inside because there's not much out there. The deck of the boat, the legs of the dive control van, the gray Gulf sky, ordinary things, the world we couldn't get back to. On the 3rd afternoon, Aubrey was at the viewport, just looking out at the world the way you do in the tube when you're starving for anything that isn't steel, and he made a sound, a small sound, and went still. And I said, "What, kid?" And Aubrey didn't answer, and I got up and looked past him out the little window, and the world outside was wrong. It was underwater. Out the viewport, where the deck and the sky should have been, there was black water, deep black water going down forever, and hanging in it, out past the glass, close, were the 3 of them, the Cheremise crew. 3 divers in old-style helmets, the big round ones, hanging in the black outside our window in the attitudes of drowned men, arms drifting, tethered to nothing, 40 years dead. And they were looking in at us, all 3 faceplates turned to the glass, and I could not see their faces behind the plates, and I thank God for that. And one of them lifted a hand, slow, in that boneless drift, and laid it flat against the viewport from the outside, and where the dead hand touched, frost bloomed across the glass of a chamber sitting on a sunny deck in the Gulf of Mexico, frost crawling out from a drowned man's palm, and Aubrey started to scream, and I grabbed him and pulled him back, and I looked one more time before I made myself stop looking, and the world outside the viewport was just the world again, the deck, the van, the gray sky, sunlight, nothing, no water, no divers, no frost, and Coker's voice was in the box saying, "What's wrong? What's happening?" And I couldn't tell him, because how do you tell a man on the far side of the glass that his window looks out on the bottom of the sea now, that the tube has stopped being a room in the world and started being a room in the deep, that they were looking in at us the way we'd looked in at their boat, that the paying mind went both ways now and there was no unpaying it. That's when I understood the tube wasn't hung in the air anymore, whatever the gauges said. It was down. In the only way that mattered, in the way the deep counted things, we were already down there with them, on the edge of the drop, and had been since Aubrey first turned his light on their boat. And the decompression Coker was so carefully bleeding off us was a thing happening in the world of men, on a boat, in the sun, and it had nothing to do with where we actually were, which was 510 feet down in the black in a steel box the deep had already claimed, waiting to see which of us it would keep. 3 divers went down with the Cherami in 1981. There were 4 of us in the tube. Do the math, it did. It took Pickett on the last night. The last night, the 4th night, with less than a day of pressure left to bleed, when we were so close, when we could feel the weight coming off us, and the surface getting near. That's when it did it. And it did it the smart way, the cruel way, the way I should have seen coming and didn't. It didn't lure Pickett to the lock. Pickett was too old and too wise and too scared to be lured. Pickett had known the whole time, and Pickett had his hand nowhere near any latch. So it didn't use a door in Pickett, it used a door in the rest of us. It waited until the deep hour of the last night, when Danny and Aubrey were on watch, and I was in my bunk in the thin gray sleep of a man too tired to really sleep. And it made Pickett, I've gone over this 1,000 times, and this is the only way it works, it made Pickett wrong. It got into the old man where he slept, and it changed him, the way it had changed the shapes at the edge of the light. And when Aubrey looked over at Pickett's bunk in the red dark, what sat up out of Pickett's bunk had Pickett's face, but it was not Pickett anymore. It was the fourth thing wearing Pickett, and it looked at Aubrey with Pickett's eyes gone black, and it said, in Pickett's helium voice, "Kid, help me with the lock. My chest hurts. I need Coker. Help me to the box." And Aubrey, kind, green, tired Aubrey, who trusted Pickett, who'd been watching for a monster and not for his own crewmate, went to help the old man to the box, and got close, and the thing wearing Pickett got its hands on him. I woke to Danny screaming. I came up out of the bunk, and the tube was chaos, the red light and Danny screaming, and Aubrey down on the deck of the tube with the Pickett thing over him. And I have to be careful here about what I say I saw, because helium light is bad light and terror is worse light. But I saw the old man's hands where they had Aubrey, and the hands were wrong, too long, too many joints. The hands of the shape at the edge of the light, coming out of Pickett's sleeves, and I saw Aubrey's face, and Aubrey was already going gray and still and gone. The life going out of him fast, and the Pickett thing lifted its black eyes off the kid and looked at me and Danny, and it smiled Pickett's smile, and it said, "That's 3 of you owed to us now. One more. Just one more, and we can all go up together." And I understood the count, finally. The terrible arithmetic of it, it wanted 4. It had wanted 4 all along, 4 new divers to replace the 4 decades of being forgotten. And it had Aubrey now, and it had used up Pickett as the hand to take him, which left me and Danny, 2 of us, and it only needed 1 more to have its 4. And it was going to take one of us in the last hours before the surface. One of us was not going home, and the deep was going to choose. Coker was screaming on the box. Coker had heard all of it, the whole thing, and Coker did the only thing a man topside can do, which is nothing, which is talk, which is scream, a voice down a wire into a tube he can't reach. 500 feet of pressure between him and the men he was trying to save, and I heard Coker's voice cracking, screaming our names, and I heard, under it, myself starting to make a decision. The same decision I think men have been making at the bottom of the sea since there have been men in sea. The decision about which one goes and which one stays. And I looked at Danny Reyes, my bellmate, my brother, the man who'd kept me in the light for 4 days. And Danny looked at me, and I saw that he was making the same decision, and I saw which way he'd already decided, and I said, "No, Danny, no." And Danny said, "Somebody has to, Wade. It's not going to stop until it has its 4, and you got more up there to go back up for than I do," which wasn't even true. Danny had a family. Danny had more up top than I ever did, and I think he said it because it was the kindest lie he could reach for, the lie that would let me not fight him. And before I could get my hands on him, Danny Reyes turned and walked toward the thing wearing Pickett, toward the black eyes and the wrong hands, with his own hands open at his sides, the way you walk up to a spooked animal, and he said, all right, I'll come down. Let the kid go, and I'll come down and let you out, but you let Wade go up. That's the deal. You take me and you let Wade go up and you leave him be. You hear me? He goes up and you never touch him again." And the thing considered it. I felt it consider. And it must have said yes, in whatever way it said things, because it dropped what was left of Aubrey, and it reached for Danny, and Danny let it take him. And the last thing my best friend ever said to me, he said in his own voice, clear, looking right at me while the dark took him. He said, "Tell my kids their daddy went up, Wade. Don't you tell them the truth. Tell them I went up." And then there were 2 men breathing in the tube, me and something else, and Coker bled off the last of the pressure as fast as the human body could stand, and a little faster, And near dawn on the 5th day, the gauge read surface, and the hatch unlocked for real, and I crawled out of that steel tube into the gray Gulf morning, the first sky I'd seen in 3 weeks, and I was alone. And behind me in the tube there was nothing, no bodies, no Danny, no Pickett, no Aubrey, no drowned divers, nothing. An empty steel tube that 4 men had gone into and 1 had come out of. And the deep had the other 3, had its 4 counting the one it took in 81 that never got replaced, had its full crew at last, and it was quiet, and it let me go. Exactly the way Danny made it promise, and I have spent 8 years wishing it hadn't. The company had a story ready before I was even up the ladder. That's the part that told me, finally, how much they'd always known. There was no confusion topside, no scramble, no what in God's name happened down there. There was a story, clean and typed, waiting, a hull breach on the chamber, a seal failure during decompression, a rapid loss of pressure in the bell trunk that took 3 men and spared 1, a tragic equipment accident of the kind that happens, rarely, in a dangerous trade. That was the official finding. Chamber malfunction. 3 divers lost in a decompression accident on Mississippi Canyon Block 219. They flew grief counselors out. They paid the family settlements that were generous enough to be quiet, and quiet was what they were buying, and the families took it, because what else do you do? And there are 3 more names on the memorial in Morgan City now, Ray's and Pickett and Aubrey's, right down the granite from Beau Cherami and his 3. And I've walked past all 7 of them, and I've never once been able to make myself stop. Coker quit the business a week after. Just walked out of the dive control van when the boat made port and never came back to it, and I heard he drives a school bus now, up in Tennessee, about as far from saltwater as a man can get. And I don't blame him, because Coker heard the whole thing, 4 days of it, over the box, every word the deep said to us. And a man can only hear the deep talk for 4 days and go on being a diving supervisor if he's able to tell himself it was gas psychosis, helium, the mind coming apart at pressure. And Coker couldn't tell himself that, because Coker had heard Danny make the deal, had heard my best friend trade himself for me in his own clear voice. And there's no gas theory that covers a dead man's ghost keeping its word. I found Danny's kids, 2 of them, a boy and a girl, and their mother, in Corpus Christi, and I did what Danny asked. I did the one thing my brother asked me with the last of his breath. I told them he went up. I sat in their living room with a company check I didn't tell them about folded in my jacket, and I told those 2 kids that their daddy died in an accident, fast, in the equipment, that he didn't suffer, that he went up. Tell them their daddy went up. I've kept that lie 8 years. It's the heaviest thing I carry, and it's the one thing I'd never put down, because Danny didn't buy me my life so I could hand his children the truth about where their father is. He's not up. That's the thing I know, and they don't. Danny Reyes is not up. Danny Reyes is 510 feet down on the edge of the deep gulf, in the dark, with Pickett and Aubrey and Beau Cherami's 3, kept the way the deep keeps everything that dies on its doorstep. And he'll be down there in 40 years when the next crew comes to tear down whatever they build on that block, and he'll be down there in 400, and the deep will still be quiet and patient and full. And none of it, not 1 hour of it, will Danny's children ever have to know. I don't dive anymore, of course I don't, but it's not the water I can't go near, in the end. I've made a kind of peace with water, the flat safe top of it. I can stand on a dock. I can eat at a place over the bay in Morgan City and look out at the boats. What I can't do is pressure. I can't go up in an airplane. I can't ride an elevator too high or too fast. Because it's not the depth that haunts me, and it never was. It's the pressure, the memory in my body of being soaked full of the deep, of carrying 500 feet of it around inside my own blood for 3 weeks. And I've read since that it's real. That sat divers carry changes in them for years, in the bone, in the marrow, that the deep gets into your actual skeleton and takes a long time to leave, and I believe it, because I can feel it some nights. The pressure still in me, the deep still bled into my bones. And on those nights I don't sleep. And on those nights, sometimes, right at the edge of sleep, in the deepest quiet of the house, I hear it. I went back out to Block 219 once, the year after, on a charter boat. A fishing trip that wasn't really a fishing trip. I paid a man to run me out to the coordinates, and I stood at the rail over 500 feet of water with the platform long gone now, decommissioned, torn down, nothing on the surface to mark it, just open gulf. And I looked down at the flat, bright water in the sun, and I thought about everything that was underneath it. The wreck of the Cherami, and my brother and old Pickett, and the kid. All of it down there in the dark on the edge of the drop, quiet, kept, and I'd brought flowers, which was a stupid thing. Pickett told me it wouldn't want flowers, and I brought them anyway because I didn't know what else a man brings to the sea. And I dropped them over the side and watched them float and then sink. And I waited. I don't know for what, for some sign, some peace, and none came. And the water just lay there in the sun, being water. And after a while, the man running the boat asked, was I ready to head in? And I said, yeah. And I never went back, because standing over it, I'd felt the thing I feel some nights in my bed. The pull, the down tug on the part of me the deep still owns. And I understood that the sea doesn't give you peace. That peace is a land thing, that the sea just takes and keeps and waits. And that the closest I was ever going to get to my brother again was 500 feet straight down, and that it wanted me to know that. It wanted me to feel exactly how close down was. And I turned my back on the water and I told the man to run me in fast, and I have stayed on dry land ever since. The fifth breath, slow and wet and out of time with my own, a breath from a chest that's been full of the gulf a long time. It comes from the corner of the room where the dark is deepest, and it says my name, soft, close, the way it said it at 40 minutes down, and it tells me it's still there, that the deep let my body go up but kept a claim on the part of me it soaked, that a piece of me is down there with Danny and always will be, on the edge of the drop, in the dark, and that it's patient, that it's got all the time in the world, that it's in no hurry at all. Come down, it says, in Danny's voice now. It uses Danny's voice now because it knows that's the door I'll never quite get latched. Come down, Wade. It's dark down here. We've been in the dark so long. Come down and let us out. And I lie in my bed on dry land in Morgan City with the light on. Because I sleep with the light on now, I'll sleep with the light on the rest of my life. And I hold on to the promise Danny made it. The promise that it would let me be. And most nights the promise holds, the way a good man's word holds even after he's gone. Most nights. But the deep is patient. And a promise is only 40 years of patience away from the next crew. And I'm getting older. And some nights the light doesn't feel like enough. And I lie there and I listen to the fifth breath in the dark corner of my dry bedroom 500 feet above where my brother is, and I wait for the promise to run out. Come down, it says. Not yet, I tell it, not yet. And it laughs, without any air to laugh with, because it knows the answer isn't no. The answer was never no. The answer is just not yet.